I just pressed the button. Do you
I see it.
What do you see? Tell me what you see.
I see the same thing as before, except for a little black box that said the broadcast is live.
Okay. And you believe it, right? You believe it.
I believe it in my heart.
Okay. We know the elites are like taking over. They've got all this technology. Don't. Do you know what I'm saying? Don't. Right?
Yeah.
Don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what I do is I go to my Twitter feed, right? Because I want to see it live. So now watch this. What I do. Have you seen any of the beginnings of these things? Have you seen the way any of these start?
I have, yes.
So you've probably seen my early days. And now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you saw the early days and then I got all fancy, right?
Good for you.
Not like you with the microphone. Not like you. But now watch it. Hold on. So now what I do is I go to my feed. I go to my feed. Okay? I don't see it yet. Do you know that?
No.
I don't see it yet. So now what I do is I have to refresh. All right? So here's a question for you. I don't know the way it is in Canada. You're in Toronto, right? You're in Toronto.
Close enough. Far enough as well. Yeah.
In Canada,
do
you people press F5 or do you press the little circle button at the top? What do you guys do in Canada?
You know what? I don't really know. I'm not very computer literate. I'm always asking my husband, like, what is the shortcut for this or that? So I can't even answer that question properly.
Okay, but when you want to refresh, I don't know the way it is in Canada, right?
Yeah.
And when you want to refresh, do you press F5 or do you press the little thing?
No, there's no F5. I don't see any F5 here. Yeah, no.
So I'm going to teach you something, right?
Okay.
F5.
What does it mean?
F5 is how you refresh. You press F5 because I'm pressing it now like a lunatic. I'm pressing it enough for you and me. So hold on.
But what does it stand for?
It means that's how you refresh. That's how you refresh in America. That's what we do.
What is the F? What is the F and what is the 5?
It's the same way that you guys like put too much mayonnaise. You guys put mayonnaise on everything, right? So it's so what we do here, is in America, we only do F5. We only do F5. So now what I'm going to do, I'm pressing F5 like an insane person. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, guess what? Guess what? Kate, guess what? I'm handing off the computer to Nancy. Okay?
Oh,
Nancy,
wow.
would you be so kind? Thank you.
That's trust.
Now do you know what I do? Do you know what I do now?
I'm not sure.
Turn down the music.
Okay. Things are getting serious.
I turn down the music. You missed the music. The silence is hurting, right? Isn't that incredible?
Yeah. I liked that music a lot.
Correct.
It was putting me into the right vibe. I was feeling those.
Exactly. Because some people, and I know I'm taking up everyone's time, and Pizzone says, thank you so much for joining us. Says F5, that's how I used to get the good Ticketmaster seats. Correct.
Oh,
you see?
Smart.
You see, America's teaching Canada something. Yeah. Okay. But you guys can teach us a lot about how to poison ourselves with mayonnaise, right? So you guys are a little bit ahead of us on the dietary stuff.
Well, what do you guys put on your food?
Not mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is putting too much crap on your food is what got the whole world into this whole problem with their diet. You realize that?
Yes.
It's like, okay, so I want to thank you so much. And I want to thank Nancy as well for helping me out here. So would you be kind enough to introduce yourself, Kate? Would that be all right?
Yes, I can. Sure. So, hi, I'm Kate Wand, and I am an artist, a creator of video content. I like to write as well. And I guess I'm a de facto citizen journalist these days because the media is 100% bought in Canada by the federal government. So I guess that's pretty much it. I have a website, very-opinionated.com, and you can check out my Twitter handle at Kate Wand. You can check out my YouTube channel, YouTube/C/Kate Wand. And this is pretty much my intro. There we go.
Okay, but I got a lot of questions for you on your intro. Okay. And how did you decide to, because you've got a YouTube as well, right? And I kind of do and I kind of don't. They keep on like giving me strikes. It's craziness. So how did you decide to start covering COVID in the way that you do? Because you've been doing kind of these, there's almost satirical, whimsy, but sad and true type of YouTube videos. And Canada is kind of a tyranny, right?
Oh, yeah, kind of is not the right term. It is a tyranny at this point in this country. So yeah, you have to point out the holes, in the logic, and do it in a way that is artistic and in a way that's meaningful. I mean, there's a lot of creative content that I think is kind of on the other side of the spectrum that appeals to emotions of the whole mainstream COVID narrative. And I think it's important to speak the truth as I see it. And so I decided to get involved in this just because I felt like there were things that I had figured out that I wasn't quite sure if other people were aware of yet. And that was mainly the aviation crisis. This was back in October, I believe. I had done a bunch of research and seen that there was no plans to save the Canadian aviation industry. And not that I necessarily believe in government bailouts. However, when the government crushes an industry, and Canada was the only country out of at least 20 countries not to help out their airlines at all, I said, okay, well, I think that there's something behind this. So I decided to just talk about it, and I put up a video series on it. And it started from there. And then I just decided to keep talking about the topic and how the world was kind of falling apart at the seams.
So can you, and we were discussing a little bit of this earlier today, right? And earlier today, you had your 2-month-old son joining us in that conversation. So, let's begin then with that, because there's so much to discuss, including euthanasia clinics, which is crazy. Where you guys, Canada's crazy, right? So, but let's talk about the airline and how Canada's stance on the airline industry. And the airline industry is one of the world's bigger employers, right? Because you have all those people who work in the airports, which is always tens of thousands of people. Even in a small airport, you're going to have thousands of people, and in an international hub, you're going to have a kind of a periphery that's, that can easily be 100,000 plus with, restaurant workers and service workers and duty free and parking and everything else.
Yeah, it's a huge industry. And I mean, so here's the thing. If you look at the big picture, Trudeau is really an ideologue. And since he's been in power, he's just been promoting this green agenda, which is not really about any real environmentalism. It actually goes against environmentalism. Like if you look at a bunch of different things that he's done, for example, in Alberta, where they produce the cleanest oil in the world, it's actually the most efficient place. They turn over their land in such a way that in 100 years, all those spaces will actually become green again. He destroyed that industry for ideological reasons. So I said, well, he's going to do the same thing with aviation. Just because that's where, if you look at the European countries, that's where they've been going, right? Germany, they installed all of those windmills and everything, and they ended up having a bunch of problems with that. And it's all about ideology and how everything looks, and about a few elite people profiting from it. And then it's becoming just extremely expensive for the citizens, for example, to pay their energy bills, if we're talking about the oil and gas industry. And if we talk about aviation, it was just like, well, let's take this opportunity, as many people like to say, right? And just kind of let it die. And that was my hypothesis. And I said, he's doing it for ideological reasons. And so far I've been right. And nobody's rebutted me on this. And
then you and I were also discussing, we're catching up because we had such a fun conversation. You and I were also discussing kind of the human consequences that you've heard and seen out there. Now, remember something we've all learned, I hope, that news is very siloed, right? So America doesn't know, New York City doesn't even know the news of New Jersey, of Newark, which has an incredibly growing murder crime rate. We definitely don't know the news of Chicago, right? Baltimore. These are third world crime stats, and maybe fourth world unsolved murders, right? It's pretty horrific. But news is very siloed. So we really have no idea what's going on in Canada, other than that you've got a topless tyrant. That's about all we know, is that, you know, you've got that topless tyrant with the beard who's learned from his mistakes of wearing
blackface.
Yeah, or whatever the term is, because I don't want to be nasty to anybody. Whatever the term is you know, I don't know whatever the new terms are, but whatever it is, I want to be respectful. But he was wearing that, right?
Yes, yes. People also call it brown face, just the color of the paint, right? Not in terms of saying anything bad against anybody, but yeah, there were multiple incidences where he did that, and he learned his lesson, though. So that's what matters.
Yeah, perhaps. So, but there's human consequences to what's going on in these policies that your government is imposing. Yep. So there are very human consequences, and now we are seeing Biden impose certain policies, and you guys are a leading indicator. So, you know, you guys, because it's such a small country, what happens today, what's legislated today, is going to be felt tomorrow. And in America, because we're so large and so disparate, and we have such a kind of a decentralized, you know, population hubs and cultural hubs, whatever is legislated today really won't be felt for another few years, right?
Yeah. And I think the federalist system as well, there's something to say for that. We're built differently, and so in Canada, it's a lot easier to get those things into motion. Like, for example, Trudeau right now has what they call a minority government. So that's something I wouldn't be the best person to explain, but it means that he shouldn't be able to make as many decisions as he can, you know, without any objections to them. Well, what's happened basically is that there's a couple of major parties, and the other parties that are even further left, they just pass any bill that Trudeau wants to pass. So it ends up being kind of like a coalition government, like just one huge leftist, and his government and the Liberal Party under Trudeau is really an extreme left party. So they just mask themselves as the kind of center left. But
I really want to understand the human consequences of the policies, because you were also explaining to me that their suicide rate has gone up so high, and then not only has the suicide rate gone up high, and there's got to be a correlation, right? But not only has the suicide rate gone up high, but the availability and the ease of suicide is perhaps almost sinful, right? Isn't it?
Right. Oh yeah. So this is really funny. So I actually saw a report. There's one news outlet called Rebel News, and they have been kind of the only alternative outlet that's really reporting on things that the mainstream won't touch at all. And they did a piece actually on in Vancouver. There was a palliative care clinic a couple of months ago during this whole COVID period, who actually refused to offer what they call MAID, which is the euthanasia drug. They refused to offer it in their palliative care clinic. And they were right across from a hospital that offered euthanasia. But they said, no, like, this is palliative care. We don't offer that here. We don't want to bring that in here. Elderly people who are here, they're not here for that kind of service, and they don't want to see people around them euthanizing themselves. So we're keeping that out of here. And they went so far as to close down the clinic. They said, well, you can't have this palliative care clinic then anymore. You can't have, I guess, this hospice if you don't offer euthanasia. And they shut them down. This was a couple of months ago. And this is preemptive to this new bill. I believe that it's Bill C7, where now there are 3 things that have changed. So number 1 is that you no longer have a 10-day waiting period. If you decide that you would like to end your life, medically assisted suicide, you can show up and say, hey, I'd like to do it today. That's number 1. Number 2 is that you used to have 2 witnesses So you would tell a family member, and then you would tell, let's say, the administrator of the euthanasia, or somebody. Let's say if you're in a long-term care facility, you tell the nurse, you know what, I would like to do this. Now you only have to tell one person, which could be the administrator. Okay, so imagine how that can go wrong. And then the third thing is that now, if you're mentally ill, you can decide that this is a legitimate reason for you. And that's a huge one. Imagine during this whole situation, that's been happening over the last year, that everybody's been extremely depressed. There's been all kinds of deaths of despair. Now they've decided, well, if you consider yourself mentally ill, then that's a good enough reason for this medically assisted suicide.
So let me understand this, because there's so much for us to cover. And one of the interesting things is Canada and Germany and China are probably our leading indicators. And I've cautioned everybody about China for the last few years. And my familiarity with China is pretty deep, incidentally. So, but they're a leading indicator. But however, their political operating system is not ours. There's really very little correspondence between our political operating system and theirs, because they've never had human rights. So they've never had these things to take away, right? They've never had civil rights, so they've never had it to take away. Human rights is an invention of World War I and II, right? It's what happened after World War II. They never had that. They never had a legal system. So America is seeing kind of a corruption of our judiciary. China has never had a judiciary. So there's nothing to be corrupted, right? But so Canada is a leading indicator. And it's probably more closely aligned to the United States than is even Germany, because Germany's always been a little bit adherent to authoritarian powers, right?
Yeah.
And America's a left country, and Canada's a left country, right?
Yes.
To varying degrees. So Canada's a leading indicator. So first, can you discuss and I want to discuss COVID, but first, can you discuss the suicide rates that are going on, and why people are speculating as to what's happening there, and the effect of policy on the suicide rates? And then can you also help further discuss MAID, which is if somebody is now suffering depression and they don't have a psychiatrist available to them, right? Because of the scarcity of these services now, they can just off themselves.
Yeah. Well, the suicide rate, the exact numbers, I won't say. I would encourage everybody to look them up themselves. All that I do know is that there has been a large increase. Similarly to what's going on in other countries, sometimes it's hard to tell what's actually going on, because what's written down on people's death certificates, there have been reports of that being perhaps played around with a little bit, for lack of a better term. So it's hard to tell, right? I mean, I'll give you an example of a story that came out a couple of months ago. It said, okay, there's this 19-year-old who dies with COVID-19, and he worked in a long-term care facility. He was a Syrian refugee, and what a great guy, and it's so sad. And it was kind of like the perfect woke fairy tale narrative in a way to say, okay, we're going to scare you now and tell you that all of these young people are dying as well from this disease. But when you actually looked into the story and spoke with people who were close to him, there were many sources who were saying, in fact, that it was a suicide, and that this gentleman had overdosed because he was supposed to go to jail the next day. And I had looked into it, and this was tipped off to me from a friend and also a reporter. And so apparently that's what had happened, is that he had been charged with various charges like felony and armed robbery and things like that. And so then allegedly he had committed suicide, but the father came out and said, we don't want people talking about suicide or this or that, like my son died of this. And so I'm just telling you what I've kind of heard around the story, but that's just an example. Sorry?
So let me understand something. In Canada, a person can have an abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And without any type of my introducing any type of commentary on good or bad, it's legalized there, right?
Yeah.
And there's no friction between a person deciding to have an abortion and the abortion occurring, right?
No.
Okay, so a person can have an abortion and it's frictionless, essentially. And I want to be very respectful to women, of course, because I don't want to suggest that there's nothing going on. And I'm just talking about the actual surgical procedure. Okay.
Yeah.
It's frictionless, and then a person can kill themselves, and that's frictionless. And at some point, that could probably even happen in the same facility.
Possibly. Well, definitely the same hospital. I'm not sure the same facility. I'm not sure exactly if that would be it, but in the same vein, I would say it's a cultural thing, right? I mean, this is something that if you look at, let's say, abortion is always a topic that's difficult to discuss, right? But there is a cultural lean towards it. For example, women are not necessarily told how devastating it can be, and that it's something that, you should avoid as much as you can, right? It's kind of treated as a kind of birth control in a certain sense, and treated very casually. And it's very destructive, obviously, to say the least. And then you look at these euthanasia laws, and there's a parallel there, because it's the sanctity of a human life. Right? So if you want to look at it that way, that's getting a little bit into the abortion debate. But at the same time, culturally, when you have this kind of idea that it's great, if you're not feeling good about life, you can go and get this made, and that's totally great. Like, this is your right. And this is kind of how the government portrays it. It's a right, to go and get euthanized.
What does MAID stand for? Do you know?
I think that it's a shortened version of the name of the medication itself.
Yeah, they gave it a very pleasant, focus group tested, kind of compassionate type of thing. Like, you can see the commercials on TV. Get MAID, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. But now at the same time, and I want to discuss COVID so much, I'm very eager to discuss it, but I really want to understand the suicide rates there also.
Yeah.
Because at the same time as you've got kind of abortion, however people feel about abortion is a different question. You also have MAID, euthanasia, but then you also have a population that is affected by losing their jobs, losing industry. Mm-hmm. You guys lost the entire furniture making industry over the last few years. So I know that's been an issue. You guys lost the entire fossil fuel support industry, pipe fitters and all that other type of stuff, which were really good paying jobs, right? People were making up to $200,000 a year, easy. I mean, just easy. Yeah. Welders making, $50, $60 an hour. And you guys lost all those jobs, and nothing is kind of, there's been no substitute in. There's been no new industries.
Yeah. And it's really funny because the government will come out with these articles, because when I say the government will come out with articles, that's literal, because the media is bought and paid for, billions of dollars, control the press completely. So they come out and say, well, we're making 60,000 new jobs this year, but how many have you massacred, right? So, and it's really funny. And then those jobs, of course, never actually get made. There you go. So it's quite interesting to see. And okay, here's a good example of these talking about suicide. So I think that two demographics that have been seriously hurt in the last year have obviously been children and the elderly, the most vulnerable, right? And so both cases, there's these, for children, there's a suicide epidemic. It's actually been called that in Canada. Now, for children between 7 and 11 years old, it's the leading cause of death.
Hold on, say this again.
Children between the age of 7 and 11, the leading cause of death is by suicide.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Nancy.
You can look this up. I've tweeted about it, and if you just you search my name, suicide from Kate Wand, you will find that I've done a thread on that. It's pinned to a video that I had made called the kids are not okay, or the children are not okay.
How do they get instruction in how to kill themselves? I mean, the human body is so durable. The human body is so incredibly durable. You can't just, if you're an 11-year-old kid, you can't just throw yourself off the 4th story building. You're going to,
certain age to go to those?
So Nancy asked, and we're just so interested. I really want to talk about COVID. Yeah. But Nancy's now asking, do you have to be a certain age to be able to go?
That's a great question. I know that what they're trying to do around it as well, because when I had posted this thread about it, somebody had came in and added on to there and said, actually, they're trying to change the definition of minor as well around the euthanasia laws. So I'm not sure if it's actually passed yet, but it's definitely in the works. And I think it may be 16 as of right now. But I think that they would like to allow children with different diseases or whatnot to be able to make the decision, right? Which goes against everything that humanity stands for. Like, protect your children. You know, there's a reason that we call them minors. Like, they can't make informed consent decisions, right? But this is why they have.
But just out of curiosity, and then we're going to talk about COVID, right? But just out of curiosity, because we were also discussing the kind of immigrant population that's coming in there, which is largely Muslim, right? Syrian. Mm-hmm. And this has to be something, their kids also have this exposure to kind of this suicide, right? This almost a disease. There's got to be some type of a media influence in it, right? This isn't something that's happening kind of without some type of intervention from the media in its advancement. But how are they kind of reacting? Because that's they still have a lot more kind of religious ties to the effect of suicide within a family, and their relationship to to their religion and to their practice of it.
Yeah, well, I can't really speak to that exact demographic in terms of child suicide. Like, that would be really something I would have to look into and see if you could even find anything about it. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it is incredible. And there's been equally deaths of by suicide, by euthanasia. If you want to call it that, I want to be careful about how I say that, but let's just call it, medically assisted suicide from elderly people who, because we've been in a series of consecutive lockdowns, and it's actually worse than staying locked down altogether. They dangle the carrot. They keep saying, literally, after all of this time, 2 more weeks or 4 more weeks, and then we're going to open up, and then they keep locking down again. And so there have been elderly people that have been reported in long-term care facilities that have just said, you know what, I would just like to give myself a medically assisted suicide because I do not want to go through another winter of isolation or another year of isolation. They're at the end of their lives. They want to see people. And
unbelievable. So Darren Brado, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you very much. Says Darren Brado says there are instructions online from Discord. Have you heard that? There's got to be some way that kids have instructions and different alternatives available to them, because when you're 11 years old, it takes a tremendous amount of effort for anybody to kill themselves, and for a younger person where their bones are just so thick and everything is, and there's also a lot more tendon flexibility. Then it's not going to happen just by jumping out a window. They're just going to be maimed for life, but it's not going to kill them. Yeah. So Darren Brado says there are instructions online from Discord. Have you heard this, or if anybody? No, there's a lot of people from Canada here. Has anybody heard where they're getting these instructions from? That's incredible.
Yeah, I've never heard it myself, but something to say about that is that our social media is so controlled, right? Already, and we have another censorship bill in the making, which we can discuss later, but it's already so controlled that there are certain things that you can't talk about on social media and that get flagged and pulled down right away. So you have to think about it that way. If these instructions do exist and that's not getting flagged, but yet speaking your opinion to lockdowns is getting flagged, for example, that's deliberate. That's a deliberate
Nancy said, my wife, who's joining us from the other side, right, says there's books on it, but those books are going to Yeah, but those books are going to be oriented for adults because there's a lot more life experience that's going to be required because they're going to go into that kind of introspective quality of it and quality of life. And when there's a deterioration in quality of life, if you're 12 years old, there's no deterioration in quality of life.
Unless you live in Canada. You know, these kids have been so scapegoated. It's incredible. They've been psychologically battered, you know. It's just this narrative that kids are responsible for the spread, that they're killing their grandparents. Their schools have been closed. They get to go back, you know, I think like maybe a couple of weeks in a whole year. And then they go back and then basically it's like, oh, well, spring break, we're just going to extend that indefinitely. And now what they're talking about is what I've been hearing is that school will only come back in session if children are vaccinated. I think that's what they're really going for. So the schools have been closed actually for the majority of the year. Children are isolated. They're told not to see their family members, you know, their relatives.
I'm going to put this up for everyone's benefit because everybody knows this is a very tricky subject. And I want to make sure that we're respectful of the guidelines, right? So that we can play in their sandbox. So I'm going to put this up there to make sure you get the best information on coronavirus, COVID-19, and coronavirus vaccines. Resources are available from public agencies. Visit vaccines.gov, and on Twitter it's CDC.gov. So neither Kate or myself are going to be able to answer any questions on the efficacy of any of the vaccines. So hopefully everybody understands that we can be as radical and as controversial as we want, but without a platform, you're just breathing and exhaling into a paper bag, right? That's all you're doing. So I want to thank everybody for that. Okay, I interrupted you. You were talking about returning to school.
Yeah. So these school closures, right? This is a really interesting topic as well. Okay. Because the teachers' unions have really been pushing for school closures. Okay. They've also been pushing for mask mandates. All right. Now, there's been a huge conflict of interest that's been identified in what's called the COVID-19 Science Advisory Table. And this is based in Ontario from the University of Toronto, mainly the professionals on this board. And one of them in particular has actually these massive conflicts of interest. And one of them is that he was lobbying for the school board, right? And so they want the schools to close, all right? And then he's also advising the government. So when the government says, should we be keeping the schools open or closed? This guy's like, oh, well, yeah, we should be closing them because it's so dangerous. Kids are spreading this disease and all of that. And, you know, there's so much empirical evidence now that they are not responsible for it. You know, if you look, there's multiple studies about that coming from Iceland, coming from Sweden, coming from a bunch of different countries. And they have this real life data. And so it's completely false, you know, and it's really unfortunate because these children should be the most important thing. And I was actually looking up Nietzsche. It was something that he said actually about an inverted morality kind of thing. And it was like, what if you were to live at the expense of the future? You know, that would be kind of the epitome of an inverted morality, right? So you're no longer thinking about the children and thinking about their lives, their mental health. How are they going to develop properly? What kind of adults will they be? What kind of world will they have for themselves? You know, you're just thinking about yourself and your own fears and your own pockets and whatever other motivators you have. You know, there's different motivators for keeping the schools closed. So I want to go back to
it for 1 second, because then we're going to go into discussion of COVID, right? I want to bring this up as well. And we've spoken on Twitter, so thank you so much, you know, for joining us here. And I recall that you're from Canada, and as you I'm sure recall as well, my son's in Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you know, one of the things that I've always, you know, America and the entire West has had kind of this immigrant dividend, right? Since World War II. And part of that is, you know, these influxes of immigrants come in And at the same time, they still have a lot of traditional mores. They still have a very cohesive family units that are going to be, when you've got a family that can talk you out of suicide or talk you out of depression, or you've got that support network. So you do have these immigrant populations coming on, and thank you so much for including the Muslims from North Africa in Quebec, and then in Indians in Ontario and Sikhs as well. Yeah. Part of my hope has always been that an immigrant population will allow some type of a restoration of norms, right? A restoration of some type of a cultural identity, kind of infused within a Western identity, right? Yeah. And it looks like if there's such a suicide rate, there's no way that the Muslim and Indian community and everybody else can avoid that. I mean, it's just going to kind of permeate into every single cultural system.
Well, I think the problem with that is, in fact, once you have the government legislating multiculturalism, frozen here. Oh, there we go. Did you hear me? I froze for a second.
Yeah. No, we hear everything. Okay. We hear everything.
So once you have the government legislate this multiculturalism, it's actually like not what they mean at all. And that's true for a lot of things. So you end up having segregation, right? Instead of this, we used to be a melting pot in Canada. We were, if you want to call it the old version of multicultural, or the old meaning of multicultural, was a melting pot. Everybody was kind of living together, and yes, they had those traditional norms, and they had those family values and perhaps religious values, and we weren't talking about identity politics, so it was normal to look down the street and see that you had people of different creeds and different religions and different ethnicities. But now it's pointing out, oh, here's this guy, that guy, and we need to use the intersectionality chart to tell kind of where everybody sits. And so by constantly pointing this out, what you're doing is you're segregating people. You're giving people something to think about that they weren't thinking about before. And so I think the culture, in that sense, those values are no longer being shared in communities. So you don't have that net positive of combining all of those traits.
So we're going to move on a little bit. We're going to get to COVID soon, but this is so interesting. I never expected it was going to go in this direction, but I know that Dr. Kaur and I started speaking before COVID, and she expressed her kind of her own qualms with assisted suicide, and kind of the corruption it brings into a whole cultural operating system, right? So Tracy is here. And Tracy, I think, is in London, right? Is in the UK. And it's funny because I think I have Tracy's book that I just bought, and I think it's 2 books down. The last time I looked, it's on my queue of books. It's there's only 2 books left in front of it. So I'm kind of excited about that. I bought the hardcover edition of it, and it's this is off the top of this is my memory now. The Future of You, and it's about the person's identity going into this next generation, about how technology is going to forever change the way people think of themselves, the way they identify, what their careers are going to be, and kind of the transitory nature that that's occurring within people's identity. If that's correct, Tracy. And Tracy asked a very interesting question with Darren Beatty, where Darren Beatty, who's very conservative, said he finds the UK to be evil. And I thought it was a very cruel thing when he said it. And then in his response to Tracy, she asked, why did you say that? And then in his response to that, I thought he was also a bit cruel. And it turns out Darren is right. The UK, where Nancy has good friends, really has surrendered a lot of its kind of what made it great. Kind of its academic, its literature, its thinking, everything that it kind of gave back into the Enlightenments. It's everything that it gave into the Enlightenments and into where we are now. It's kind of taking back. It's clawing it back. So Tracy says, right, and thank you so much for joining us. Is there a sense of rebellion? When are parents going to resist this? Like in the UK, people seem so placid.
Do you want me to answer that question?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I mean, when are parents going to resist this? That's a great question. I think it goes again to the topic of inverted morality, right? Which is a herd morality, which is, well, we're just going to be complacent. It's not popular to go against the consensus, I guess you could call it. And so, whatever, it's no big deal for our kids to have to wear masks all day long. It's no big deal for them to be on Zoom calls all day long. There's the other extreme of people who just want more. They're so paranoid that they project all of that stuff onto their kids. And then there's people who are just meek. They will not say anything because they don't think it's their place. They think, okay, well, obedience is a virtue, and that's it. And it's really funny, Tracy, you're in the UK, and it's funny because that's kind of how Canada started off, right? We ended up bowing down to the Queen, and that's why we didn't become the United States. So I look at it this way: is we never really separated that. We always have this bowing down to authority that is part of the heritage, so it's become this value. It's a Canadian value. Well, the government is benevolent and they will take care of us. If we are good citizens, if we follow the rules, if we follow the laws, they don't question, the corruptibility of a government. They just say, well, this is how it is. And so we're going to do what we have to do. And if we keep following the rules, eventually, it will be over. And it's only those stupid anti-maskers who are making this hell for the rest of us. I think that's so. I don't know, when will people actually stand up and say something?
You want my answer? You want my answer to this?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if a lot of people here know that I've been keeping a log. Right. I started it, and I thought of it at first as a COVID log. But then it became so much more with the riots that were going on and kind of all this cruelty that the elites were employing for this fastest roll-up of power in history. And that people will always acquiesce. They will always allow all this political intrusion into their rights. And with each subsequent cut, they will forget what it was before. So people really have to watch Dark City, and I've talked about that because people's identity is changing, and they don't realize it. They're being changed behaviorally, and their identity, the way they think of themselves, is radically changing, and the way they think of their environment is radically changing. And you're not going to appreciate it because you're going to think, well, I remember the days before a mask. You actually don't. I keep a log. I could quiz you. I could quiz everybody here, and I can tell everybody here, you don't remember the way it was before. You think you do. You have recollections of walking down the street with a loved one or walking your puppy, and then maybe seeing me, and I pet your puppy because I love dogs. I pet all puppies, right? And you're going to remember, and you're going to think that was freedom. And you're going to remember some type of encounters that you would have maybe in bars, or if a person's single, some type of a single type of encounter, right? Because that's a part of a person's youth. And that's going to be your recollection. So you're going to have these recollections that are almost episodes of freedom, right? And it's not it's episodes of, if I were to create a TV show called Freedom, it would have little episodes, like little vignettes of what that is. But there's no total freedom within it. And even the freedoms that have been carved after the first Patriot Act, and after all these other kind of surveillance intrusions, you just don't remember the way it was. You're never going to remember a time before a green zone in DC, which they said they were going to dismantle, but it turns out they really didn't dismantle that much because there's still a white supremacist problem and all of this type of nonsense. So I don't think people are ever going to resist. And I've had this conversation with Michael Anton and a whole bunch of other people with about Machiavelli and Thucydides, because I study them. And I think that people don't resist until they go starving. Until people are starving, they're not going to really resist. And while you're seeing pockets of resistance now, with time, those are going to go away. And Machiavelli has written a lot about this, so people should, because none of this is new. And I would suggest reading Discourse on Livy. So sorry to depress everybody, but I think that all we can do is kind of preserve our own sanity with our families and everything like that. So, you know, I know that there's resistance going on in the UK and that they've been able to get some accommodation. And now that's what they think freedom is.
Yeah.
They think freedom is the accommodation that the government gave them. Yeah. And everybody is still fighting the COVID wars. Let's take off our mask. That war is over. People lost. Yeah. We lost that war. The war that has to be fought right now is this great reset, because America has been entirely recapitalized as a country, and people don't even realize it. Our entire country has been carved up and cartelized within the last 2 years, particularly within the last year. And people don't realize it because they haven't seen its oppression yet, because they're still locked up. So they haven't seen any of it. In any event, that's my answer. What do you think? Good, right?
I think that's a great answer. If you actually go see the kind of documentary that I did on the aviation industry here, one of the reasons I did it as well was to warn our American counterparts, because this was a couple of months ago. And, you know, I said, if you have somebody who's leading your country who goes along with this ideologically green, so-called green agenda, that's where you'll end up, right? Is in a place that's kind of enslaved. There's a fantastic book. It's called The Green Reich. I suggest it very much. Oh, wow. And it's by a philosopher named Drew Godefriedi. He's based in Belgium. And, you know, the green tyranny has taken over there, right? So he knows about this topic personally. He lives it. And so Canada's kind of following suit. So what he argues is very interesting, and nobody has made a counter hypothesis to this. It's that political environmentalism is the new totalitarianism, and it is the ultimate totalitarianism. And he says it's worse than even Marxism, because he argues that even Marxism is pro-human, even though ironically it needed to kill hundreds of millions of humans. What it was a quest, you know, to make all men equal, right? That was the ideology at its foundation. It went about all the wrong ways to do so. But he argues that with political environmentalism, it's man itself that is the problem. It's his every movement, it's his CO2 emissions, it's everything that he does. And so if man is the problem, then what is the final solution? The depopulation of man.
Yeah, I think that's what they want. And I think that our tech oligarchs have some scale, or on some scale of Asperger's also, right? And I don't mean that with any cruelty, because we all know people that have Asperger's, and it's just kind of there's certain characteristics that are common within the scale. One of them can be depending upon the scale, different grades of empathy and ability to relate to others and communicate with others. And I think that a lot of them have Asperger's, and they generally don't like humanity. And because they've never failed, they look at humanity as a startup problem. They're like, how can we get this startup to become an IPO? And they're like, we need to pivot. We need to pivot the model. And that's what they're thinking. And if people don't know the term pivot, it's a term that's applied to startups and to tech companies that where one path isn't working. So they kind of quickly iterate and go a different direction with their business model. And so these tech gurus look at it as humanity as a failed business problem. And it's going to be interesting. But Canada is very hostile. And now let's go into COVID just a little bit. So I'm going to put up this warning. I'm going to put up this thing. But I first want to, on closing up with this assisted suicide, whatever the term is used. I want to be respectful of the term that's used. Yeah. Meet Titan 90 and 84. Who is that? That's a sports person in Canada, probably. Who is that? Who's 84 in Canada? A football jersey. Who is that? You don't know, right?
I don't watch sports. I do not.
Now I'm
unless it's live, unless I'm, at the baseball field and eating one of those jumbo hot dogs. And
so Meet Titan said the media, particularly the CBC, has been trying to downplay the suicide problem in Canada. Have you seen that as well? I mean, do you see any discussion of that? Is there censorship going on about discussion of it?
Oh yeah. I mean, here's the thing: is that the CBC is worse than CNN, okay? It is really the government propaganda mouthpiece. It receives billions of dollars. It barely has any organic views. You know, they have to advertise everything, but they've really taken over kind of the narrative on everything in Canada. And that's not only been in relation to COVID, but this has been going on for a long time, but particularly now. So of course they're downplaying it. They barely report on it. And when they do, it's never because of the isolation or the school closures or the way that people are being treated. You know,
what subjects from your, and somebody much earlier on said that Rebel News was just deplatformed off of PayPal, I think they said. Did that just happen today?
I don't know if it happened today, but they have been viciously attacked, you know, in numerous ways. So one of them was Ezra Levant, who is kind of I believe he's the founder of Rebel News, the leader anyhow. He actually wrote a book criticizing the Trudeau government called The Libranos. And he wrote this actually during election season, and he was investigated because of that. Now, they've also been told that they were not allowed to show up. Their journalists were not allowed to show up for any election coverage. So they couldn't actually go and speak with the politicians during election season and ask them questions. They actually went to court, you know, under some kind of emergency injunction, you know, overnight. And then they were given, you know, allowance to go finally and report on this. And the government has been suing them. And there's all kinds of things going on. Yeah, they've been deplatformed from YouTube recently. And they're a media outlet, right? So this is enormous. And now there's a new bill coming out, Bill C10. I believe it's C10. Yeah, anyhow, and this is a new censorship bill where now basically everything that you see, say, post will be controlled, you know. And this is actually modeled, I was speaking with you earlier about this, after the German model for the social media censorship. And it goes beyond social media, even articles. I would argue that this is, you know, a kind of CCP model, like a Chinese Communist Party model of censorship. It's quite extreme, and they would like to implement that.
So do you know, and then I really want to get into COVID, but there's such, Kennedy Hall too, thank you so much for joining us, says reading the Bible in a public school is not allowed in Ontario. Is that something that you're familiar with? And I think Kennedy Hall had said that they're a teacher.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, but it would not surprise me at all. It seems in line with everything else.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if does that also apply to other religious documents as well? You know, the Vedas or you know, the Quran.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I wouldn't speak to it because I don't know about it, but I'll definitely look into that.
And so C short and then a whole bunch of digits. And I recognize you from before, so thank you so much for joining us. And a koala bear. I love animals.
Beautiful.
I know,
beautiful
right?
Picture.
I know. So in Japan, it's a popular method of suicide, mixing household products to create H2S. Yeah, but when you're 11 years old, it's still hard to kill yourself. I mean, your lungs are so fresh. You know, there's so many instances where kids can drink Drano, and even with all the damage that they're going to do to their internals, they're going to survive it. The body is, particularly when you're that young, is so durable. I mean, there's no way they can do it without a tremendous amount of instruction or the availability of high caliber weapons.
That's a really, really good point. And I had not thought of that because it's so terrible for me to even think about that. Yeah, it is difficult to listen to. It's really tough to imagine. But I mean, like, if you think about what the social situation is like in a household now, right? You have these parents who either they've lost their jobs, right? Or they're working from home, or they're, you know, actually allowed to be out there working, you know, because they're what the government considers essential, which is terrible terminology. So you have now, and then you have these teachers unions who are pushing really hard for the online school, and they're giving these children enormous amounts of work to do at home, like treating them like a little laptop class, like of mini adults, right? And some of these kids are 6 years old. And so, yeah, and the parents are like, how do we handle this? And, you know, they have to call in and say, okay, my kid's online, and do all kinds of things. So they really have an extra full-time job, you know, in monitoring their children in their online schooling. And so you can imagine the amount of stress in the households, you know, and just what kind of dynamic that can create, you know, in an already stressful and oppressed population, just on the familial level, right? So then you have these kids that are obviously going to end up neglected just by default, because how can a parent do everything, you know?
So
and especially, I think. Go ahead.
Because there's a little bit of a lag, so I thought you had stopped, so I apologize. Actually, that's not true. That's not what I just interrupted. Okay, so Rising Serpent, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And it's actually what we were just discussing. So I want to bring it into context of, and you have a 2-month-old baby, so this is something that you're actively thinking about. Yeah. There's no way you're not thinking about this every moment of every day, because you had your baby like right here, right? So Rising Serpent, again, thank you for joining us, says, what is the role of parents in exacerbating the sense of isolation?
Well, I think it's not that they're exacerbating the sense of isolation, but I think that depending on, you know, if the parents are scared, the kids are going to be scared. You know, if the parents are doing well and they're kind of, you know, staying on top of things and they're trying to keep things as normal as possible, then the kids are doing better. But, you know, kids are smart. And so they see what's going on in the outside world, and they all hear about, you know, the C word, and they're like, what's this? What's that? And they think that they're these biological weapons, you know? And so it's not necessarily that the parents are exacerbating a sense of isolation, but it's that in certain households that may have had kind of like pre-existing, you know, abuse or neglect, or maybe just the tipping point, you know, that might be happening more often. And so, and some of it's just by default because the parents have to go to work and nobody can actually take care of the kids, or maybe they can't get a babysitter. They can't afford a babysitter. Maybe they have somebody watching their kids who's not the best person to be watching their kids.
I don't know. The term that you used, biological weapons, where these kids are feeling that they're biological weapons, and that's obviously something that is being manufactured into them, because that's not a natural type of thought. Did you just make up that type of a phraseology? Is that something that has been kind of, because I'm gonna take it.
You take it. It popped into my brain.
I just want to find out who I'm taking it from, right?
I don't know. I may have read it somewhere, but it just popped into my brain.
I'm going to remember that. That's a really interesting description, because I remember Germany came out with a document that was leaked out that even said that they wanted to convert kids. They wanted to push the sense of kids are the transmission. Kids are the ones that have the cryptic transmission within them. It's very interesting that kids can kill mom and dad. That's really Germany sucks, right? So we're going to skip around a little bit. Then we're going to talk about COVID, because it's very interesting. So Darren Pareto says, yes, she is right. Kids in Ontario have been scapegoated big time. Thank you for that. This is all news to me. Avatons, thank you so much. And what bike is that? I don't have a bike anymore. I miss my bike.
This Mike?
No, a bike. See, Avatons he's driving a bike. You see that?
A bike.
He's not wearing a helmet.
It's a nice bike.
It is. It's beautiful, but he's not wearing a helmet.
Safety first, Avatons.
So true. Don't be a biological weapons, Avatons.
Do not.
Okay. I know. So beautiful bike though. And I remember when you changed your image to that. So it says, is there a difference between the lockdown situation in Toronto versus that in Montreal?
Oh, yeah. So there is a little bit of a difference, you know, just in the language around things. But it's kind of the same thing. I mean, so in Montreal, they have curfews. They can't go out of the house past 8 p.m., which is insane. And now there was some lady who did something quite funny when that was implemented. And Adam, you can ask your son about this, because he's there. He might have heard it. But there was an exception, is that if you were walking your dog, you could be out past 8 p.m. And so this lady, she decided to take her husband, put him on a leash, and put him on all fours. And they went outside for a walk. She got stopped by the bylaw officers. They gave her a ticket, you know, and she said, I'm just walking my dog. You know, I'm okay. This is anyway. So that's one thing. So they have curfews. Ontario or Toronto doesn't have curfews. Toronto and or Ontario is just kind of like a constant curfew. I mean, now there's the police have authority to, if you step outside of your household, they can ask you where you're going and why. They have authority to do so at this point. So that's kind of like a permanent curfew, in my opinion. Like, it's actually called a stay-at-home order.
Well, it's oppression. There's no way that that's not oppression, emotional oppression.
Yeah. Yeah. And there have been like roadblocks in some cases, you know, the police will pull people over and say, hey, where are you going? What are you doing?
That ever happened to you?
No, it hasn't happened to me. And I'm in rural Ontario, so I'm quite fortunate because
Nancy, what's your hold on, Nancy, can you report her? Report her? I want to get my like gold with a medal for this. Nancy, can you report her, please? I want to hear the knock on your door. While we're doing this, I want to hear the knock on your door. I'm horrible. But you got to admit, that would be kind of funny too, though, right? If you, no,
I would film it all. I would film it all.
I know you would, because your YouTube is awesome. Your YouTube really is awesome. It's got a lot of whimsy to it and scariness at the same time, right? Because you got to kind of blend the two to have an effect. So, and here Bawash is also responsive to that question. So I really want to thank you for this. It says provinces have a different policy each. In Quebec, they closed early but they've been open for months. You and I were discussing this about Doug Ford and about the differences and how while here we have kind of a dual sovereignty, obviously state and federal. Out there, you don't have that.
Well, it's different. Okay, so basically what's happening is that the federal government has this kind of umbrella quarantine act, which which basically gives authority to public health officials, you know, to be considered kind of like peace officers and to be able to intervene at different levels. Okay, but they also at this point they don't have as much direct authority as the provinces. Okay, so the provinces are handling their own public health measures because provinces are actually in charge of the healthcare sector. So, but they're all mostly in lockstep. Like the only province that hasn't really locked down is Vancouver. I'm sorry, is British Columbia,
which is Chinese Communist Party has a huge presence there because that's where they launder a lot of, you know, everybody knows. It's not like I'm saying something that's unknown. Yeah. Canada's had that problem. They've even imposed, I'm kind of an expert on this, they imposed a real estate tax, but the way the Chinese Communist Party membership was getting away from that, you probably aren't that familiar with this part of it, but they were settling when the property values were going up so much. In some cases, they were going up 5 or 6 times within a very short period, that they were selling the properties for a break-even value. So they weren't capturing that profit. But then on mainland, they were settling it on the mainland in China, they were settling it for the profit. So the taxes, in any event. Vancouver, that's interesting. So can you have, like we have here, a Florida, where Florida is kind of resistance central now, right? To the lockdowns, can you have that in Canada?
Well, like I said, in British Columbia, okay, so they don't have a lockdown. So in a sense, yes, but at the same time, there's an enormous pressure. And then there's also the Quarantine Act, which umbrellas over everything at the federal level. However, the Quarantine Act was really implemented in terms of ports. So for example, like flights coming into the country and different things like that. So there can be, you know, a certain level of resistance to lockdowns, but I don't think that they could go as far as Florida. I don't think that like there's that much power that each province has in terms of making those decisions.
In Canada, can people travel freely within Canada. So if you wanted to go to wherever, Canada's such a big place. So if you ever wanted to go to like a Tim Hortons 1,000 miles away, right? Because Canadians love Tim Hortons. So if you want to go to like a Tim Hortons 1,000 miles away, can you just jump on a plane, or like what's your own kind of travel restrictions? And then Rising Serpent asked this also, and it's very curious because we want to visit our son in Montreal, right? Yeah. And a new baby. He's got a 1-month-old. He's got a 2-month-old baby, just like your baby. So Rising Serpent, again, thank you so much for joining us. Said in Canada, what is the evidence for the isolation measures that are including lockdowns, school closures, and masks? What are they doing? And you were discussing a little bit of this with me today, that they've kind of changed the rules around.
Yeah. So there's no empirical evidence of any of these things actually working. And if you actually ask, politicians have been asked at various levels to provide this information, and they just don't. There's no accountability there. So then there's 2 things going on as well, okay? Maybe 3. So you have Ontario, which is the largest, most populated province, has this science advisory board, which is doing the Neil Ferguson style modeling, okay, saying that it's doomsday and, everybody's going to die and the cases are going to go like this and the variants are going to destroy you and kill you and all of this kind of stuff, and they're dangerous and you should be afraid to walk out your front door. So you have all of that kind of fear mongering going on at the provincial level. And this is kind of where the science is coming from. It's all models, it's all projections. And the majority of them, the vast majority of them have been wildly wrong. Okay. But these are still what the decisions are based on. So this is being used as evidence, even though it's future, it's projections. Evidence is something that already exists, right? Then you have the federal level. They have this thing called the COVID-19 Immunity Task Force, which is based out of McGill University, which oddly enough has a lot of infiltration by the Communist Party of China, because they're working with, their researchers have been working with Huawei, and there's a couple of different things that have come out about that. Okay, so there's some interesting things going on there. So that research kind of coming out of McGill seems pretty shady and pretty corrupt. And now the people leading this task force, okay, are also deciding that the science is settled, of course, and they completely refute T-cell immunity, which is the long established trait of coronaviruses, right? Which means that you have, pre-existing immunity to things. So you may not, if you've come across different coronaviruses in your life, then you may not be affected so badly, or you may not, need any kind of, or things like that. So that what they've focused on is antibodies. And if you're focusing on antibodies, then that kind of focus would lead you to assume that a solution to that would be a type of injection. Okay. So what they've done is they've actually said anything that is herd immunity or anything that is natural immunity does not exist. The top Minister of Health, actually, of Canada, Patty Hajdu, came out the other day and said that vitamin D supplementation as a prevention, for any kind of coronavirus, which there's been some research on, right? She said, I would be wary of fake news and of anything coming from non-governmental sources. So any kind of research that you'd like to do, you shouldn't be doing research. You should just be listening to whatever the government tells you is the science with a capital S on this whole situation here. So, yeah.
I was on mute because my Annie cat, the one that's very vocal, was going crazy. She's a nuts sometimes. So what I want to understand, and going back to Rising Serpent's question, is internally. Remember, all news is siloed. We have no idea what's going on in Canada. Zero. We have no idea what's going on in Europe. The only thing we know is what we're permitted to know and a little bit of human interaction that occurs, right? So in Canada, what type of kind of intellectual kind of discourse is actually happening, because there's a failure of presentation of alternative science and the alternative arguments in science. So people have to notice that, right? So what type of kind of discourse is permitted, and how are they shutting down that discourse? And then what's happening with the media? Because I know that the Trudeau regime has really been very hostile to journalism.
Yeah, so there is nothing allowed that you know, it will be censored at some point or another if you say anything that does not coincide with the government's narrative. It's a very tightly controlled scientific consensus, you know, and like I said, it refutes decades-long knowledge about these types of viruses, and yeah, that's basically where we're at. It blows my mind. Like, for example, there was the Great Barrington Declaration, which came out, you know, with and they came and joined with some Ontarians to talk about different views and about lockdowns and I guess you could say different scientific ideas and different empirical evidence. And that was not covered by the media at all, you know, and these are some of the top epidemiologists in the world, you know, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, Sunetra Gupta, you know, and they came together with Dr. Kulvinder Gill and the Dr. Shabbos, who is actually, he used to run public health in Ontario for a decade or so. So they all got together and they spoke about this, and it was a really great talk. And, you know, that should have been covered by the media, and it wasn't covered at all. And, oh, I think you're on mute again. Is that possible?
You got to read my lips. You got to read my lips.
I'll learn.
That's part of the fun of these things, is you got to read my lips. That's how it's going to be from now on, okay? So I want to show everybody a video that I think is really interesting. It's only 40 seconds long. How does Canada explain itself to itself? Let me show you the video, okay? Watch this. Everybody, it's only 40 seconds. You hear my cat?
Oh, yeah.
Watch the video. Don't think she's cute, because she just wants candy. Hold on, watch this.
Building back better means getting support to the most vulnerable while maintaining our momentum on reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Canada is here to listen and to help. This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Do you guys know that you're screwed?
Svolich, you know?
So here, Avatans Kumar, and I want to thank Avatans Kumar again, who's also a journalist. And he writes for some friends of mine in a conservative news outlet that some friend of mine's run and own, Swarehi. I'm trying to pronounce it with an American influence rather than burden you with Hindi, but Swarehi, I guess you would say in American, in English, right? So which is awesome, and also writes a lot of commentary on India. So I'm so glad you joined us, and they also are very familiar with what's going on in Canada, clearly, because they added this comment. So similar situation in the U.S., talking about what the teachers' interaction, the teachers' involvement with the government there. The American Federation of Teachers had influence on our American CDC school reopening guidelines that were released on February 12th, 2021. And then they also included a link. So we saw that here, and you're saying that you saw it there, and your system is much smaller than our system.
Yeah. If you go watch, I did a video and I was actually helped by some great researchers. So I just like to give a shout out to them. They wish to remain anonymous at this time. But it was a big spider web that was discovered in Ontario in reference to the conflicts of interest, including the teachers' union. All right, behind the reasons for these lockdowns, or what seems to be the reasons for the lockdowns, and the incentives to keep the province locked down or the country locked down. Even if you go watch the video, it's called "Tragedy and Crisis in Ontario," and there's also an article, or rather, the script, I guess, for the film is available to read as well. And you can see in there, I've hyperlinked those same articles, which show how I believe that it's the teachers, the Elementary School Federation or something like that is the name of it. So very similar to what Avatons is saying here, which were involved in the school reopening guidelines.
Yeah, and then I showed you that 40-second video of Trudeau, and I said that you guys are screwed, right? I mean, that's just a declaration of war. Forget about the Barrington or whatever that thing is. What Trudeau said is a declaration of war. And it's very explicit that their intentions are, and you and I were talking about this a little bit before, because I'm not particularly an admirer of the left, of the very hostile versions of the left. Like my cat, she's a leftist. Okay, no. Okay, so
I thought cats were libertarians.
Oh no, she's a leftist. She just wants candy. She's a socialist. Give me candy. So Carl Greenwood, 12. Thank you so much. Family in Ontario. Takes all my reason and trust to convince the relatives that compliance is the problem. The only way to end this is I don't like when people talk about vaccines at all or talk about masks or this or that. I call that the trolley problem. We were discussing a little bit earlier today, right? Yeah. The only way to solve this, and I like Alex Berenson, I like Jordan. I know they've done a very good job in kind of being a journalist that shows the absurdity of these things and kind of the clash of science. Yeah. Kind of that they're very Karl Popper in their approach to kind of examining this, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So
falsification.
Yeah. So they do a good job of that. However, and even though I subscribe to Jordan, I don't really read these things too much because even entertaining it is becoming a participant in a trolley problem. And with this very with the morbidity rate as it is and the excess death rate and kind of the evidence that is undeniable in terms of, its morbidity and its death and who's impacted and the effects of diabetes and everything else, you really can't become a participant in a trolley problem where you can't say that, this many people, this is the acceptable amount of people that can die if we do this and herd immunity and do that. You just can't allow yourself to become a participant in it because once you are in our solipsistic, I have a list. So I'm just going to say solipsistic, right? And our solipsistic societies, the entire world, we're never going to be able to get into an agreement on an acceptable solution to the trolley problem, right? We're much too atomized and fragmented as a world society. So you just can't do it. You just have to let everybody go out. And if everybody drops dead, that's what who cares, right? That's what happens.
It's a distraction too,
In Montreal, in Canada, you've said that they're euthanizing each other, right? And kids are killing each other, which is such a horror. I don't want to say that flippantly. I'll take that back. Very unfortunate. But where you're seeing such human tragedy, can they stop pretending in Montreal like they care about human life when you've got these 11-year-old kids killing each other or killing themselves, which is just such a horrible thing. So, my son loves it there, but clearly he is aware of the problem. Something I warned him about for a long, long time. And I want to look for Darren Brito's second part of that, because the first part is, yes, Adam, you are right. I'm an immigrant, but there is more encouragement of diversity then. I have to find a part two of that because I'm very interested. I always get my Hindi and English mixed up. Do you know that? You were listening to my Hindi earlier on, right? Before this began, you were listening to my Hindi.
It happens.
Yeah. Because the emphasis is on different ways of pronouncing.
Yeah, the inflection is different, and then your brain switches kind of into that.
Yeah, I get that. So and they continue with Kate is right. It used to be a melting pot under mainly Judeo-Christian values. Yeah, which is, look, we had the immigrant dividend. Everybody knows it, right? It's the West, after World War II, we created functioning human rights, right? And observances of human rights, and created these kind of the structure, the architecture for an actual judiciary and international committees that could kind of have oversight and regulation of these things until we didn't, right? So I want to continue on, but now I want to discuss a little bit and I want to include this comment because it's interesting. Parents are upset, right? You know who the parent is because everyone's upset with thinking about this. So MT Trade Journal, thank you so much. They're in finance like I am, and I know Avatar is also investing, and I try and persuade everybody to because it's so important. Says most parents will never resist because their truth is equal to the predominant social norms.
Yep. That's the herd morality. That's the herd morality. You know, it's antithetical to the Enlightenment values, right? It's saying that heroism is no longer a value. It's that actually Stacey Rudin said this quite well in her essay. We did a video on where she talks about Epictetus, and I never say his name properly, this philosopher, but he was saying that, you know, conformity is actually not the value, and popularity is not the value that you want to model your life after, right? And so, but in an Enlightenment era, it was, you know, all of these heroic tales. Those were the things that people strive to be, you know. And I think that that's what's missing, and that's one thing that can get us out of this too. You know, if you think about actually, I read a great book. It was A Hobbit, a Wardrobe, and a Great War. And it was about the friendship between J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And they were both veterans of World War I. And following World War I, or maybe before it, you know, and following it, there was a lot of nihilism in the population. And among authors and philosophers and artists and creators, writers, they were quite nihilistic after World War I. So they were writing this poetry and this literature, which was quite dark. And they said, you know, we need to actually write these heroic tales. And that's where you get Lord of the Rings, you know, and those are the kind of tales that I think this is one thing that we can do, is change the culture from the ground up. If we can say anything positive about this whole thing, is that's the power that we have as creators or artists or writers or people who speak, you know. Tell heroic stories and tell that to your kids and raise them on those stories and make them want to be Frodo Baggins, you know, and rather than being, you know, the guy who just fits in, you know, and a lot of it has to do with that Netflix and chill culture, you know, what's popularity has become a virtue, and it's wrong.
C.S. Lewis coined one of my favorite terms, and it's bulverism. Have you ever heard of bulverism? Bulverism?
I've read some of his stuff, and it rings a bell, but I forget what it means.
It's kind of it's an argument style. So it requires a very belligerent argument style. And it's that you have to show that, I'm going to use the word man because if I recall, he used the word man. You must show that a man is wrong before you start explaining why he is wrong. So it's a type of argumentation where you assume your opponent is incorrect, right? And then you quickly move to explain the causes of his folly. Do you follow me? So so when I think of C.S. Lewis, I think of some of his writing on that. It was remarkable. So I think about bulverism a lot because I see evidence. I see it. I see it kind of playing out in kind of the failure of dialectical discourse.
Yeah.
You know, that's occurring. So there's a lot of comments here, and I want to say that Avatar says that was pretty good, Adam. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have difficulty juggling all of it, and I don't have the ability to have such wonderful pronunciation as and articulation as Nancy or Johnavy, right? Or Johnavy Harrison, right? So
actually, she has the exact same pronunciation as Johnavy.
Yeah. Who does? Oh, yeah. So, and Darren Brito says it was not Trump versus Biden, but Trump versus the Great Reset. Well, you know, in this election, I decided in 2016, I knew Trump was going to win in 2016. I knew he was going to lose in 2020. I didn't know what the circumstances would be and how they would deliver the loss to him, but I knew there was a moral corruption that would have a very high tolerance of however it occurred. Nevertheless, I didn't think that Mr. and Miss Joe Smith from Pennsylvania and Mr. and Mrs. James from Georgia and Mr. and Miss Tompkins from Arizona were going to be permitted to alter the course of the Great Reset. So, you know, it is what it is, and we're talking about trillions of dollars. So, you know, they completely recapitalized basically the world, and people have not seen its consequences yet, but they will. So when Apple recapitalized itself and did their 7-for-1 split, right? We saw, because you bought the stock. Everyone knows I've been very assertive on buying stocks. So we saw that, and you bought the stock because they basically created themselves into a different company. America and the West have created themselves into something completely different. And it's now been cartelized. You just don't realize it. But now you're beginning to see evidence of it because you saw that Bill Gates is now the largest landowner in America, which makes him essentially, he has the most valuable property in the world now, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing even to talk about. There's, you know, he can buy the Beamy Islands, and he can buy, but in terms of the natural assets, it's going to be here, it's going to be Greenland, there's going to be small pockets, but America has the water basins, we've got everything, the availability of water routes, maritime routes, we've got everything. And then today, Biden said that he was going to introduce legislation that would now federalize the peripheries of Bill Gates' property. So that means that we have no rights into it anymore.
Yeah.
I can discuss this pretty extensively because, you know, I'm kind of familiar with how that works, the legal frameworks that are used and the tax frameworks that are used to do that. Don Sussman has that in St. John's, nevertheless. But we basically are not being permitted to storm his plantation. And so I expected Biden to win. I told everybody who was going to be FDR. I told everybody in March of last year that Biden was going to be FDR 2.0. The media was going to have to portray him as that. They were going to have to say that he has a mandate from the people to raise taxes, to rejoin WTO, to re-engage with Trans-Pacific Partnership. In Europe, it's called TPIP, which is horrific. They're going to be a trade and services agreement that Biden's going to introduce very soon, which will destroy the Western job markets. It will make NAFTA look like kids play, which is going to be really interesting to watch. And remember something, all of these things are no longer domiciled within our sovereignties, right? So they're now creating all these agencies that have no oversight by Americans anymore. Like we're creating the infrastructure bill. I was very familiar with certain things. I was very familiar with the actual details of the Trump infrastructure bill that was not passed, which was a public-private partnership. The one that Biden's introduced is going to be several $7 trillion. It's a sham. I don't even want to discuss it. I could talk about it. We don't have enough highways and bridges. I could tell you about the bridges. Forget about it. There's not that many bridges that are out there. Most of the bridges that you hear about, like 50,000 bridges, are basically just mom and pop walking across the street type of bridges. Did you know that? Did you know that?
No.
And the state that has the most out of repair bridges is California.
Wow.
The state that's had the most funding for repairing of its bridges is California. So when you hear about states like Missouri that have 11,000 bridges, those are basically, many of them are just to allow cattle to cross roads. Did you know that? I could tell you about this. And a public-private partnership, this is what happens when you have a collapsed fiat economy. Nevertheless.
Fascism. That's fascism.
But so what happens is the trillions of dollars that they're printing are going to be held in banks that exist outside of American sovereignty. So we're not, they're going to be the bankers for it, and our own Congress won't have any oversight over it. So Biden is going to rejoin Paris Accord. He's going to again terrorize developing countries by basically either giving them a choice, coal, which is cheap, right? Or, and very, obviously pollutes very badly. Either coal that's cheap, or these carbon credits and kind of a dependence on Western bonds, right? These Western bonds that are very difficult to repay because, I'm boring with all this stuff. Nevertheless, we didn't come here for me to talk about it, right? But I did not expect Trump to win. I didn't think that a couple of voters in Pennsylvania, Arizona were going to be allowed to change the course of human history. And I knew the narrative that they were going to give Biden. We're going to see essentially 100% tax rate because we're going to see a VAT tax, which is you and I were discussing a little bit. I've written threads on it. I've tried to explain VAT tax as much as I can. When you say that Americans are not heeding the wisdom of Canadians that are saying they're trying to put on the loudspeaker and say, Americans, watch out for what's happening. You're right. Americans are idiots. They have no idea what's happening in Europe with VAT taxes, the wealth destruction that's occurring. They have no idea the amount of civil unrest in Europe that's happening because of the wealth extraction that happens from gasoline tax, carbon taxes, the unfairness of it, just the whole thing. I could talk about this. And also with immigration, because what's happening with immigration in Greece and a lot of these countries is the immigrants are coming over and their rents are being paid 2 years in advance. So what happens when you do that is the indigenous people can't afford to live in their own towns. And that's already beginning here. And it's part of the, whatever. I get upset about it. But in response to your question, in response to Darren Brito's, it was not Trump versus Biden, but Trump versus the Great Reset. Yeah, greed has never had so many ways to express itself, and our elites are very cruel. And I think the only way this is going to be remedied is when people are starving and hungry enough that there's kind of a raid on Entebbe.
Yeah,
I think we need a raid on Entebbe to release us from the airplane of pharma. Right? They got to break us out.
And you have to consider something as well, right? Is that in Europe, they've kind of gone along this because the Great Reset kind of puts itself underneath this carbon neutral agenda, or now they're talking net zero. Okay. Same thing as COVID zero, right? Both strategies that are completely anti-humanistic. And what you have to consider as well is that in Europe, they've had some success. But if you look at it, their countries, or what appears to be success with the whole green renewable energy centrally planned, because their countries are smaller and their temperature is milder there. They have infrastructure already for electric trains and things like that. So, having electric vehicles, electric cars was a little bit of an easier move. But if you look for countries like ours, like Canada or the United States, we're these vast countries, where you wouldn't be able to just, take a train from coast to coast. Like, that's not the way that you want to travel, right? You want to be able to take a plane. What they'd like to do, actually, you could look up this thing called UK Fires, and it's an NGO, which is lobbying the UK government to reach net zero emissions. So by 2050, they don't want to have any more airports running. They don't want to have any more planes flying at all. So by 2030, they'd like to reduce it to about 90%, close all of the airports except for Heathrow. And then by 2050, everything shuts down. But of course, the elites can have their private jets because those are exempt. And interestingly, Bill Gates also purchased a whole bunch of private jets in the last couple of months. I'm not sure if you knew that. But what I mean to say is that if you look at Canada, we're a big cold country. We have cold winters. And so you wouldn't be able to have this kind of infrastructure. The renewable energy would not be so efficient. You can't have electric vehicles only. You can't ban fossil fuels. But that's exactly the path that we're on. And that's the path that you'll be on with your president that you have right now. And I think there's going to be a huge revolt. I don't think that it's going to sit very well. As you said, I agree with you, Adam. Once people start starving, once they realize that they can no longer provide for themselves and they're very desperate, I think that there's going to be a revolt and there's going to be some civil unrest.
They're not going to realize how bad it is until it's already bad. And these are conversations I've had with Michael Anton. I've done a lot of really cool periscopes, and I have these conversations with a lot of academics where there's a lot of historical context. Here's Tony Bonino. Thank you so much for joining us, and I recognize that image. So thank you again. In Canada, so I look at Germany, China, and Canada as our leading indicators. Guys, Canada is probably about 2 years ahead of us. America's catching up, unfortunately, quickly. The time distance is kind of collapsing, obviously. And in Canada, in Europe, our most leftist parties are right wing in Germany. I mean, Germany is a crackpot place. So in my other cat's going crazy now. So in Canada, what do you look at as a leading indicator? When you say this is where we're going, what do you look at as your own kind of yardstick for, again, a leading indicator of what's going to happen with Canada next?
Okay, well, you have to look at what the leaders are saying. You showed that little clip there, the 40-second clip earlier of Trudeau. So listen to what they're actually saying. They're telling you what they're going to do. So just listen. That's an indicator. Also, I haven't read Klaus Schwab's book, and I haven't read Bill Gates' newest book about how to avoid a climate disaster. But probably if you read those books, you'll know exactly where we're headed if we don't change that trajectory somehow, right? So yeah, and then the other indicators are just seeing those things play out in real life, like looking at your energy bill. If you live out west, like in Alberta, it's going to be a very cold winter, and they can barely afford to survive anymore with those heating bills. The government at some point had actually recommended that people just seal their windows and wear more sweaters in the house because the energy costs were becoming too much.
Canada, or maybe it was Britain, had something about regulating the type of sex that a couple should have. Did you ever see that?
Oh, no, but
in England,
I mean,
they were trying to regulate the type of positions that couples could have, which is not a position, it was a shitty position too. I think it was like number 13 or something like that we were allowed. We couldn't get number 1 through 72. We had to get number like 17. Right? Watch this. Everybody watch this. This is going to be a minute. World Economic Forum deleted this. They took it off every website that they could find. I hard copy everything. Watch.
Yes.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, I've seen that. It's so crazy. And actually, if you read, there's I think it's the UN Sustainability Report. They did a report. Actually, I read quite a bit of it. It's quite long, though. It's like 80 pages long. And they talk about that, how, emissions have dropped 7%, yada, yada, but it's not enough. And even if we remain at these levels, we're not going to meet our 2030 targets. So we better do more, and what it's going to come down to, listen, this is my hypothesis, is that the green pass, it's called, right, which is supposed to be a choo-choo passport. It's called green pass for a reason. Okay. This is going to be a carbon emissions passport. This is again going back to that whole argument that humans are the problem. Every breath, every movement, every car ride, but even just you walking, you're emitting carbon, right? So it's going to be a tracking bracelet for your movement. That's what it's about. That's my opinion. And that's just like a hypothesis that I have. And if you read The Green Reich by Drew Gottfriedi, go get it, people. Go get this book. It's really important.
Watch this. Watch this. Everybody, I'm only going to put this on for about 1.5 minutes. You're going to like this. You're not going to like it. Did you see that person said that this conversation isn't making anybody else nauseous? Of course it does. But we have to deal with reality, right? We've got it. We're under assault, and we've got to deal with reality. Watch this.
I don't know how it will play out in November, but what we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed, and particularly also people in the grey economy, which are not counted for, who lose their jobs. So we will see definitively a lot of anger already now, but probably increased by the end of the year, because this crisis will be with us until we really have found a remedy. So we have to prepare for a more angry world. And how to prepare? It means to take the necessary action to create a fairer world, to see that we provide everybody with decent access to the health system, that we make sure that those people who are really left behind, and I'm not.
Now that's crazy, because we can't give everybody in the world healthcare system. My sister, I'm going to say a family member, is a hypochondriac, and she goes to the doctor, my family member, goes to the doctor for every single thing, and no other human being could afford it, right? I'm telling you right now, no, normal people can't afford it. I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but normal people can't afford it, and we can't even afford it. It's craziness. I mean, she goes to the doctor for everything. Well, you can afford it. But nevertheless, so all they're going to have to do is ration healthcare. There's no way they can afford to pay for everybody to be my sister. If you give everyone free healthcare, you're going to make everybody a hypochondriac. This guy. Yeah, my sister even went for shingle shocks, even though she never had chicken pox. The whole thing was crazy. The whole thing is crazy. So that German guy was doing everything but like petting the white kitten. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did a little video on that as well with what's it called from this old movie, a black and white movie. Oh damn, I can't remember now. But go check like my very early videos. You'll see a cool The Strange Reset, I think it's called, and there's some cool footage there. Anyhow, listen, your family member's story makes me think of something that's actually happening in Ontario right now, where they are reporting that they are rationing healthcare, exactly like you're saying. And we have socialized medicine, right? So listen to this. The last few years, every year in flu season, the ICUs are overblown. You know, there's reports every year, like headlines. I actually have, this proof of these headlines, a collection of them that shows every year, oh my gosh, we're overwhelmed here, and the ICUs are out of control. So now they're saying that this year, this is just because of this virus that we're in the same situation that we've been in every other year. Okay. Just to scare people. And so now they put out this order where they've said to people, well, we're going to be rationing who actually needs care. And if you are not coming in for C19, well, we might not be treating you.
Well, you have to understand, I'm an expert on this. I could tell you about my companies, their PEOs, not going to tell you about them because I love talking about it and I wouldn't shut up. But I can tell you all about it. And the reality is, and I've done analysis on Bernie Sanders, Medicare for all. We've had top people do it because these policy type of things have real implications to us, even though we know it's not going to get passed. Nevertheless, what happens is if everyone gets health care, everyone's going to go to the doctor for the craziest shit. Look, I'm a hypochondriac. If you just tell me to go to the doctor for everything, but I don't like doctors, right? Because they always, I don't like them. I don't like them. But nevertheless, they always want something from me. Okay, but so the thing is that, but if you tell most people, go to the doctor for anything that hurts you, any type of uncomfortableness you have, you're going to have people like the member of my family that goes there all the time and bankrupts the system. So you have to ration it out. And then at the same time, I've been in situations where I've had to compete with people who are very low income for healthcare, for quality healthcare. And I'm like, look, I've spent a fortune on taxes. I'm jumping ahead of this person. I want to be fair. I'm a nice person, but we also have to be real. If you're being taxed several $100,000 a year, it's not the same as a person that's not paying taxes and they're on welfare. It's not. I'm telling you, I feel bad, but we have to deal with reality. Yeah. So
I hear you.
So I can tell you that part of Trans-Pacific Partnership is Canada and all the other bankrupt healthcare systems, NHS, is going to be carved up and given to American healthcare companies. Take a look at some of the WikiLeaks that came out about Trans-Pacific Partnership. It'll blow your mind. And there was a lot of secrecy going on about it. I love this stuff. Giant, and we still haven't even talked about COVID, right? So Giants Winnetall, Giants Winnetall. And what is that picture of? Do you see that picture? What is that? Oh, it's Biden.
Somebody falling down the stairs.
Biden, it's Biden falling down the stairs. Biden, I'm hoping that he will break Hillary Clinton's falling down the stairs record, because she fell down more stairs in 2016 than she climbed.
I didn't know that. She
fell down more stairs than she climbed. So I'm hoping.
Does she pick dandelions for Bill?
I know. In my chapters, I call that media adoration. So for Giants win it all, funny picture, right? And I want to be respectful of Biden. We all do, because we know that the guy has certain physical and perhaps mental impairments. So whatever. So I do want to be compassionate to that. Will the Canadian people cave into the government or fight back? What's your feeling in Canada? Do you see any type of opportunity for resistance to convene?
I do not see it in the majority of people. I see it in people who are in the West, because they've already dealt with all of these hardships because of the oil and gas industry falling apart. And a lot of people lost their lives to suicide there as well, and lost their homes and things like that. And they're very, very angry at the Trudeau government. And I think that they're the loudest dissenters, But then in Ontario, the people are very, very compliant, and they believe everything that's going on. And I think the same can be said for Quebec, and even in the eastern provinces, which, by the way, have been shut off from the rest of the world for months now. And I think that they're doing a COVID zero strategy, like they've been doing in New Zealand and things like that, but they're just not being straight up about it. So, and the scientific advisory tables in Ontario, they're actually saying that they want that for Canada, this zero COVID strategy. And they're going more and more towards that. And the media is getting more aggressive with the fear mongering now about the situation in India, about the variants. They're saying that they need to close the provincial borders. So that's what they've done. The borders are closed between Ontario and Quebec.
I have a lot of friends in India, a lot of friends in India.
And I was checking that out on your feed a little bit there.
Yeah, and I never intrude in another country's political and social affairs, because they're such intricate type of creations that all I can be is an interloper, and I refuse to be that person, because I don't have to. I'm not there sufficiently that I'm gonna feel the consequences of what any type of social solution I propose, right? So I just don't. But I can definitely say that Western media is very anti-Hindu, and they are using this as a political lever. The same way they used it against Trump. And I'm not talking about whether I voted for Trump or not, because everybody knows I am completely emotionally disengaged from the 2020 election. I knew Biden was going to win. I just wanted to observe it. That was it, right? Period. Yeah. But they're clearly using it as a lever, because that's not to say that there's not really a crisis, a healthcare crisis that's going on there. But remember something, Biden had promised and never delivered, because he never gave a date on when medical supplies would be given to India, right? And this goes back months. And Europe is the same way. They both committed to giving, but they didn't give any dates on it. And also in terms of ventilation equipment and pharmaceutical supplies and the basic ingredients needed that India needed. They still have a very nascent, they have a pharmaceutical complex but they need basic ingredients, and it goes into APIs, it goes into other types of things. America, Western media is reveling in what's going on there, which is so unfortunate, and they're using it as a political lever. And I see the same type of footage that we were seeing here last year. And in fact, today on my Twitter feed, they said, look at this hospital in absolute crisis mode under COVID. And, last year I saw the same headline in Twitter, and they said, this is a hospital in Queens, which is a few miles away from me. And they were like, this hospital is being bombarded, and it's this and it's that. And they showed this really frenetic type of place where people were dying. And it was just, it was like, it was like a TV show. It's just, absolute chaos.
Yeah.
Turned out that the footage that they used was from Italy. At its absolute worst. It was the worst hospital in Italy during the worst part of it, and that was the footage that they used, and it was CBS. So it reminds me a lot of the same type of propaganda. And I'm not saying that there's not a crisis in India. I'm talking about the levers that are being used for propaganda and an anti-Hindu propaganda, particularly in the West. So, and then Bawash says that Quebec is full of hypochondriacs, full of old people with bags that have 20 boxes of meds. I have a family member like that.
So do I.
Because these things are on actuarial tables. So when I take a look at an actuarial table, I know that there's going to be in a population, there's a law of large numbers. I know that there's going to be a certain number of people dying of cancer, a certain amount of cancer incidents, breast cancer within women of a certain age group, high-risk pregnancies, 20-year-old boys who never get anything wrong, 40-year-old men where they start dying of heart attacks with, chronic conditions. There's a whole bunch of other things, heart medicines, and, a lot of chronic conditions. And then you also have catastrophic. I know a lot about this type of stuff with actuarial tables, a lot about it. And I can tell you, with a diabetes epidemic, everything goes out the window. It's no surprise to me that people were dropping like flies, because I saw this happening years ago, that it was going to blow up all the actuarial tables. And now when you combine that with all these people who are going to be over-treated with medicine, which means it will be given too much pharmaceutical, and then the relationships that they have, and we're not curing their basic diets. We're still feeding them sugar, salts.
Yeah.
And as inflation becomes a bigger problem, the way they're going to have to substitute, if you have a family on a lower income, you're going to have to require to be able to get in your calories, you're going to be consuming a lot of sugar, salt, and fat. It's going to be bad. People are going to be dropping like flies, and I feel like I'm gambling on it, right? Because I know it's an easy bet and it's kind of tragic. And India is a competition to China, and that's why Irene, and then a whole bunch of digits and a cute picture of a puppy, says India's competition to China, and that's why. Even preceding that, the Western media has been very anti-Hindu for a long time. And you can even go back 10, 15 years, and you can see it. However, and then they glorify Gandhi and the Gandhi family, which is somebody I'm not sure if I want to have glorified, particularly his the later members of his family. They're kind of like our Bushes, right? So they're not people that I want to continue to celebrate, right?
Yeah. But I think there's something to say about that. I think that the imagery coming out in the mainstream media, the imagery of India, does remind me of the people dropping dead from Wuhan. I think maybe that's what Irene is referring to.
Yeah, it's they're using it as a political lever, and it's unfortunate. Yeah. And it's just so obvious they don't even care anymore, because the left is now such a little. The left is so afraid of being deplatformed by their fellow leftist that they could literally watch people carried out to concentration camps and be afraid to tweet about it. Yeah. They could watch their next door neighbor being beaten half to death by the police and carried off with their family to a concentration camp, and they would be afraid to tweet, to take a picture and to tweet about it and to alert authorities, because they don't want to be deplatformed by their own leftist.
Well, I think similarly, Canada doesn't want to be deplatformed by the Chinese Communist Party or by Xi Jinping, because actually, this is interesting if you want to know a little bit about what's going on this side of the fence in terms of the Uyghur Muslims who are being brutalized in these camps, right? These so-called re-education camps where there's mass rape and grotesque things happening to them. Terrible, terrible crimes against humanity, genocidal, right? And the Liberal caucus under Trudeau decided that they would step out of the vote when Parliament was voting to see if these were crimes against humanity or not. They withdrew. They said, we're not going to comment on it. And they've refused to criticize anything that Xi Jinping or the Communist Party of China have been doing. And this is very scary as well. So you could see that we're definitely in bed with China. And I think that it's worse than that. I think that we're indebted to them in some way that's similar to other countries like New Zealand or even Italy, right? If you look at the Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so
yeah.
There's something happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't want to get too lost in that because there's a lot of questions here, but I'm still very interested in COVID, right? So COVID, they're locking everybody up. They're locking everybody up. And there's so much physical force that's being used, and they're not permitting open travel. And I just don't understand how they explain that to the population in Canada.
Yeah. So there's actually been a pastor in Alberta. There's been 3 pastors particularly who have been made examples of across the country for refusing to close their congregations or their churches down during this whole thing. And the latest one has been a pastor in Alberta, and he basically said, get out of here to the public health officers and the police officers who showed up at his church. And now it's been 3 times at least that they come and stalk and harass him and they're giving him different fines. And basically now they've served him this order that says the public health officials have the authority to use whatever force is necessary against you if next time you don't comply with our orders, where they can use physical force against him. And this actually falls into a video that I did called Canada's COVID Coup, where it talks about the implementation of the Quarantine Act and what that means. Basically, like this public health aristocracy that we are living under today, this authority was developed post-SARS. So all of these positions were developed and all of these special powers were granted to these new positions, okay? And so now they're kind of able to do what they'd like, and that wouldn't have been possible without this Quarantine Act and without the implementation of, it's called the Public Health Agency of Canada. So this is the kind of police force that now is being used at discretion of public health officials for people who are not following orders. The language that they use in the Quarantine Act is people infested with vectors. Anybody who may be suspected, or anybody who's been in contact with anybody infested with vectors. And so what's happening with vectors, excuse me. And so what's happening in Canada is there's a mass asymptomatic testing regime. There's a mass contact tracing regime. This has also caused a lot of kids trauma too, because they go to school, they have to get tested, then so-and-so's neighbor is sick, and it just never ends. And then people are quarantined and they have to stay home, and at some point, even the Public Health Agency, I believe, of York, which is north of Toronto, large city, they said, if your children have any positive test or they've been in contact with anybody who may potentially have this virus, well, then they need to be isolated in their own home. So they need to be put in the basement, basically, and you can go and feed them their meals, but you can't actually interact with your children at home. You should wear a mask in your home with your children, all kinds of crazy stuff. And they got a lot of heat for this and they withdrew it, but they're nuts. The cat.
You gotta read my lips. Yeah, my cat was going crazy. Feels like Nazi language for Jews, infested, rats, unbelievable. I'm going to do another with or another Twitter live with Paul Gottfried, who's actually an academic on this, because I'm very interested in the language. And a lot of my Twitter lives kind of drift a little bit because everyone's so interesting. but I'm very interested in the language, and even the language that Biden used in his executive actions. Look at the list. It's published. It was published on the National Register. So look at the list and go through each one and look at the language that was used. It's clear which direction they're going in, and it's also very clear that they're going to tax everybody and ship it all off to Africa. You can they basically just wrote the whole thing. But I think that people have a remedy. People have to invest. You have to invest because the markets are going to skyrocket for the rest of your life. Now, that's going to be a problem in many ways because the wealth distribution is going to narrow. But at the same time, that's how the elites are creating liquidity for themselves. You've got to invest. So I think that we are going to have a 100% tax bracket. And I see the rabbit holes go above about taxes, but they've got to be able to capture those taxes, and you need an event to capture the taxes. So they can either capture the taxes through a payroll event, which has a very high frequency, through a transaction, which is like a VAT, because Canada sucks like that, right? Everybody in Europe knows it. VAT's a disgusting thing, right? And it's very malicious. It's very pernicious also because they can kind of flip the switch and you don't even know what's happening. And all of a sudden you're like, I just got paid 40% of taxes. So there's going to be effectively 100% tax rate. But the way people can remedy that for their own well-being is to invest in the market, because you can see what's happening in the market. It's never going to stop. It's never going to stop. But I want you to discuss, because we've talked about so much, and Bawaj is here. Yeah, lots of triad money laundered in Vancouver casinos and real estate. That's been going on for 20 years. Canada was very slow to fix. The triads were permitted to build the financial infrastructure from the 1980s on to now. And the crazy thing is that because money is so fluid now and so fast now, the velocity of money can be so fast now, what it took the triads 20 years to build can now be done in a couple of months, right? So in terms of shadow banking, in terms of mortgage shops, all the things at pawn shops, the things that are required for shadow banking, you can do that in a couple of months now. So it's kind of interesting. So we're going to close up soon, but there's a lot of questions here. But I still want to ask you about COVID. How people understand, how they've changed the science over there is so fascinating to me, because they have an absence of silence, and the absence of silence has become branded as science.
Yeah. Well, this is what's really funny, is that actually the Trudeau government has invested billions of dollars into the narrative, okay? And the Trudeau Foundation, which if you look into the Trudeau Foundation, they actually receive, again, a lot of money from CCP. Anyhow, they've invested so much into the narrative around COVID that, for example, when they tried to censor and silence one of the physicians in Ontario who was speaking out about this, what they did was they actually said, well, so-and-so did not follow the science from China, and therefore whatever she is talking about is wrong, And so there's just like, they use their policies as proof, as evidence. And I'll tell you a personal example. So when I was, pregnant, they had some crazy things going on there, like basically they want women in labor to wear masks. They're swabbing newborns up the nose, if they suspect that you may, test positive or anything like that. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They've even separated mothers from their newborns for up to 55 days because a mother kept testing positive, and that was in Montreal. And so they've been doing all this stuff. So I was in a battle with the hospital. I said, well, provide me some empirical evidence that these measures are safe for me and my unborn child. And here's a bunch of stuff that I'll throw at you. Okay. So I would throw them a bunch of different studies and a bunch of different things that I had found, and they couldn't rebut it. They had nothing to say. They were like, well, refer to the public health guidelines, refer to this, refer to that. And I'm like, you're referring me to your guidelines as science. And then if I actually look into the citations behind that, and I read through every single one of them, then I can debunk them and say, well, this is not peer reviewed. This is anecdotal. This is one case of this. This doesn't support this. So they don't actually have anything. It's all built on air. And so they say, well, you just have to listen to the government. You just have to listen to governmental sources. And that's it. And they've started this campaign called Science Up First, where it's basically they have the good science, and this is government funded. So they tell you everything you need to know, and you can't trust anything else. And then they've poured a bunch of money as well, billions of dollars into propaganda campaigns, essentially. They call them anti-misinformation campaigns, so that anybody who's talking about, things that don't adhere to their version of the capital S science should no longer be put out there, and it should just be shut down right away. And they cite nothing. They really have no citations. It's all based on modeling, based on projections, and based on theories that are easily debunked. And then they ignore everything that existed before 2019. It's unbelievable.
I'm still trying to understand, and I discuss this with my son a lot, how because my son just doesn't have as much of an awareness because he's so busy with work and his wife is busy, and they've got their young child, that they don't really have a system view whatsoever that they've been able to put together of what's happening. So their life right now is just kind of a series of events, right? Pop, 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 pop. The event my next event is I have to feed the child and do the feeding. And then there's a next event, and my next event is this. But they don't see anything of the world that's happening outside of those events. So for them, it's for them it's like a running refrigerator, right? They don't have any sense of when you shut the refrigerator door, and that the light turns off, but you don't know what's happening inside. They really have no sense. And now I see that they have a little bit of inquisitiveness about what's happening because they know it doesn't make sense. They know there's no longer any science, but and they have a lot of intellectual curiosity. But Canada does not permit any type of discussion.
No, it does not, and they've really controlled the. Again, it's really the media that has done a number on people, and so. Since all of the media is bought, literally 100% of it, it's impossible for people to get their information elsewhere. And so that's literally all they hear. And when you talk to them about what's going on Twitter and all of these different studies that you've read, and, that's kind of the way to stay connected to what's happening. Like, you won't find it on Facebook, and you won't find it really on the news, that's for sure. And so there's really this disconnect for people. They just and it's traumatic, the stories that they put on the news. It's really it points to your emotions, and it tries to manipulate. So people don't even want to watch anymore, I don't think.
When did you decide that you needed to tell this story? And you're taking professional risk. You're taking actual life and liberty and professional risk in telling the story in a way that you do.
Yeah. Well, I just, there was no other way for me. I don't know what else to say. It just, it happened that I had figured something out, and that I had a hypothesis, and that nobody else was talking about, as I said, about the aviation crisis. So I said, well, let me talk about that. And then it just went forward from there. And then I wouldn't post those things on my personal Facebook, because I said, well, I don't, as you said, I don't want to necessarily put my opinion out there for everybody. And now it's just open the floodgates. I mean, what else am I going to do?
I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show everybody something because I keep a log. Watch this. Tell me what this means to you. Okay, that's enough. Does that mean to you that this is never ending?
No, the idea is that it goes on forever.
Yeah.
The idea is...
Isn't that explicit? And I'm very interested in everybody else's, because I haven't looked at the comments in a second. But doesn't that mean that it's never going to end because they're now building up the behavior? When you see a mask like that, you're thinking, hey, you know what? I want to buy it. That's kind of cool because I know I'm going to need it next year. Another virus is going to come. I'm going to need it. And now all of a sudden, here's an interesting comment. Crypto Robertson says, yeah, we've commoditized breathing. It's a very interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah. When your breathing is controlled, it's the most basic thing. It's the most fundamental thing. Breath, human life. You know, when my baby was born, it was like that first gasp of air. Wow. That is the sanctity of life. That is the essence of it, is your very breath. I mean, that's what the mask for me represents. It represents the control of your life, your breath.
Clay Space, thank you so much for joining us. Clay, you got to get the laser eyes, right? You got to get the laser eyes. Kate, you too. You know what I'm talking about, Kate?
I've seen them.
It means something. Clay knows what it means. You got to get the laser eyes. We all do. Because
I don't know what it means.
Milton said, I bought Bitcoin because what Milton said is it's now the only way that people can kind of restore their own sovereignty, particularly financial sovereignty, is through Bitcoin. So Clay, and you too, Kate, and buy your kid a little Bitcoin. Right? So Clay Space, thank you so much for joining us. Says the U.S. is fighting this government overreach with a turn towards localism and fleeing cities. Is that similar in Canada?
It's fighting with a turn towards localism. Well, I think that it comes down to the individual, and there's not necessarily pockets where people think the same way. So I'm not sure if the movement is quite as developed here. You know, like, for example, you look at Florida or Texas or places that have opened up, right? I mean, I guess the people in these places have felt that way for a while. And so they can organize these kinds of things. But in Canada, we're so sprawled out, you know, our population density is very different as well. So you might not be living anywhere near somebody who has the same beliefs as you when it comes to things. So the localism factor, I would say, is not very developed here. Maybe in Western Canada, I would imagine that it might be a little bit more than where I'm living in Ontario. I mean, I live in a rural area where you would expect that kind of thing to happen. And there are some people who are kind of more down to earth here, but there's a lot of people who really believe in the whole collectivist narrative that they're doing the right thing for the greater good. So hard question to answer.
Watch this. Hold on, I'm going to take off Clay's comment first. Watch this. This thing is, these people are crazy. It's like a pharmaceutical ad. Everybody sees the vaccine thing there. I'm playing by the rules. I know the sandbox I'm in. I'm just saying it's like a farm ad. Nothing wrong with that, right? I want to stay. So watch this. Everybody watch this. I have about 100 of those from all over the world.
Yeah, same.
And
same.
Yeah, you can show me your search.
Okay, so this is what's happening in Australia. I think this might be New Zealand. Watch this.
Yeah, you can show me your search warrant before you go through my house.
You're the 5 or 10? Yeah, I own this house.
There it is. There's a search warrant.
Search warrant for what?
Now, what I will explain to you is if you want to listen, you got your phone going?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Right. Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Incitement.
Yeah. Now, you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given evidence.
Excuse me, incitement for what? What on earth? Yeah. Excuse me, what on earth?
So just put your phone down.
Can you record this? I'm in my pajamas.
What's this?
I have an ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant, so...
I'll take it easy.
What's this about?
If I have an ultrasound in an hour.
Let me finish and I'll explain. It's in relation to a Facebook post, in relation to a lockdown protest you put on for Saturday.
Yeah, and I wasn't breaking any laws by doing that.
You are actually. You are breaking law. That's why I'm arresting you in relation to insult.
How can you arrest her?
That's in front of my 2 children.
Can't you just say to her, take the post down? Like, come on.
I'm happy to delete the post. This is ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah.
But I have to give you these caution rights. You understand?
Yeah, that's fine. Like, I'm happy to delete the post. This is ridiculous. Like, this is in front of my... That's fine.
Maybe giving evidence. You understand that?
Yeah, that's fine. But my 2 kids are here. I have an ultrasound in an hour. Like, I'm happy to delete the post.
You also have the right to communicate with or to communicate with a legal practitioner. You understand?
Is that amazing? So in Canada, did everybody here see, and I think Ezra posted it, that they were literally tearing some guy out of his house? Did you see that video where they basically did a no-knock search, and then the police tore him out of his house, and his own family members are trying to hold him are trying to keep him in the house, and it's like this tug of war happening over the guy's body.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But people, so we don't have that as much in America. In America, you guys are a leading indicator. We don't have that type of narco regime.
Yeah. No, it's very, these are things that actually, they go against our constitution, right? But they're happening anyways. And what is scary, though, is that there's something called the Emergency Act, which has only been enacted 3 other times. And it was during World War I, World War II, and then during something called the October Crisis in 1970. And that was enacted actually by Pierre Trudeau, our Prime Minister's father. Okay. And there's a lot of talk that this might be something. And talk is basically the media and the puppets and the actors who are basically coming out and saying like, oh, well, we should have restrictions on movement between different areas, which are things that are in the Emergency Act. So, for example, like I might not be able to go more than 10 minutes outside of the radius of my home and different things like that. And what's crazy is that if you look at Canada, we have 38 million population, right? And 24,000 deaths from this whole thing, right? So you're like, what's going on here? I mean, even if this were larger numbers, it wouldn't be justified. But you look at that too, and you're like, what kind of proportionality to the problem is happening here? Why are we still locked down? Like nobody's sick anymore. You know, like this thing is endemic now at this point, and people are doing well. I mean, there's other things happening, I think, right now in relation to other factors, but you know, I don't want to get into specifics. But when you look at the big picture, it goes against the Syracuse principles. You know, it's out of proportion with the emergency. It's been prolonged for far too long, and the use of force is just increasing. And the officers, I think, are doing things that are against their oath, and then the doctors are doing the same. They're coercing people to go through medical interventions and experimentation. You know, I said to my doctor at some point, like, it's an experimentation for me to be wearing a mask during labor. Like, I don't know what that's going to do, you know, to me and to my unborn child. And I'm not willing to assist in that experimentation, right? And it's like, well, these are the policies. Why? You know, what's the evidence? There's nothing behind there, right? So it's extremely unethical what's going on in the country, and it's extremely scary.
So tyrannies always turn inwards. I'm 54 years old. You're young. You're what, like 27? Is that right?
Oh, thank you. 33.
Oh, you're a baby. You're a baby. Now the baby's got a baby. I'm going to show you, and a lot of people here who are in their 50s will recall this vividly. And it's interesting because when people call themselves conservatives, right, and they say that they're going after conservatives. When people say they're going after conservatives, I don't really find them as authoritative as they should be, because I'm not a conservative. I'm a New York liberal. Everybody knows I'm a New York liberal. But at the same time, I want to show you what I had to endure. Okay, what you didn't, and you know nothing. You think you do, but you know nothing of what my generation had to endure with this. Watch.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes, there were F-117 stealth bombers involved, launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The attack came in waves, cruise missiles followed by the F-117 stealth bombers with so-called bunker-busting bombs. Their target, a bunker believed to be sheltering what are called top leaders of...
The Iraq War was built on a lie almost 20 years ago. Whatever COVID is, history will tell, but Iraq War has endured for 20 years, right? Almost 20 years. Afghanistan, almost 20 years. And that was the lie of my time, right? These lies don't just resolve themselves. The lies become an industry. And so when people say they're going after conservatives, like I think Darren Beatty just posted an article from Revolver where they said that one of the new advisors in the Department of Justice or in the military is they're creating new terms that it's no longer white supremacy, right? Because you can only do that for so long, because how many immigrants can you call white supremacists, right? It doesn't have it just doesn't stick, right?
It's not as effective, yeah.
It's hard calling somebody. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of Muslims. I know a lot of people. Most of the people I know are immigrants. They're more Trumpster than any white person I've ever met. I mean, some of them are wild because the white people are so afraid of being rejected by their own left. So they kind of coax each other. They just continually do this kind of self-referential loop, right? It's an endless loop. While as a lot of the immigrants saying, "Hey, listen, I know what political Muslim is. I know what bombs dropping is. I know what being terrorized by my own people's like, or I left Haiti because they did this to one of my family members. Or this. They've been through this. So it's just very interesting because that's the lie my generation endured. They lie to us so much every single day. Like you hear about COVID every moment of every day. We were hearing about Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destructions. To this day, people still think that there actually were weapons of mass destruction, but Saddam we couldn't find them or this or that. Everyone's got a friend who served in Iraq who actually knows that there really were weapons of mass destruction because they saw them. I'm telling you, everybody claims they have a friend who served in Iraq and they know that there's weapons of mass destruction. There was 2 reports, Chiclaw report in UK, which was commissioned as because Blair is such an ass, right? And then there was a U.S. Senate report, and there was never any. I'm happy to share it. I shared it a lot on Twitter, but both of them were very large reports that said that there was never really reliable intelligence that supported any of like the yellow cake uranium and this and that and the aluminum cylinders that were being used to cycle bombs. It was all just a lie. But these lies have gone away. And all of the perhaps lies with COVID, whatever they are, maybe truths, I don't know, time will tell, will also be gone. COVID will remain. Why it remains, nobody will ever remember. Does that make sense to you?
It's the same reason that we still take off our shoes at the airport.
Perhaps. I certainly am not an authority on it, so I can't say if there's any real security reasons for that. I mean, I don't know if I hear that used as an example. I don't really know if that's appropriate, though, to be honest with you. Nevertheless, the same lies that, my generation remembers every single day for about a year. Condoleezza Rice, just because she's black, she's supposed to be kind of like the good black person. Basically, her and Colin Powell were the. You don't follow boxing, so you wouldn't know this, but Evander Holyfield was the good black person who was going to beat up Mike Tyson, who was the bad black person. That's always the way they cast these things in any country, right? And they portrayed her as the good one, so therefore black people should trust her, right? Because here's a good black person. Black people, historically, I mention this because historically, the black left was the most anti-war, right? Isn't that true? Think about it. Everyone should think about it. The black left was the most anti-war. If you take a look at how we got out of, if you take a look at what happened after World War II, right? A lot of the peace movements were driven, and there was some communist infusion within that. So, you know, I'm aware of these things, but were driven by the black left, the anti-war black left. And then what happened is Condoleezza Rice, then Colin Powell, and now movies like Black Panther have made them even more belligerent, war belligerent than white people. So it's very interesting. So they lie to us all the time. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, they're all a bunch of liars when they say they weren't supporting it. That's just their bullshit. I was there. I remember. Yeah. They were like, well, I don't support it, but I'm going to vote for it. So just like that war endures for 20 years, Afghanistan endures for 20 years. There's no reason for us to be in Syria. I've been hearing that we've got to save the Kurds since my days on Wall Street 30 years ago. 30 years ago, Norman Schwarzkopf's nephew was one of my old bosses on Wall Street, Norman Schwarm. Okay, great guy. We used to drink all the time. So, so I remember in the first Gulf War where we had to do it to save the Kurds. I've been hearing about these Kurds for 30 years. You know how many Kurds there are? 2 million of them. We could have literally, over that time, and taxpayers are going to do this because we're good people. America's a leftist country. We're a left country. We could have literally moved that entire population of Kurds and bought Greenland and put them in Greenland. Everything would have been good. Or we could have brought them into the United States. It's only 2 million. It's not like you're talking about a lot in a country of 355 million. We could have put them on. So I've been hearing these lies for 20 years. So when I hear that they're deplatforming conservatives, so Darren Beatty did this. I'm talking a lot. I get excited about this. Darren Beatty did this article on Revolver. And the article says that there's this radical, right? And apparently he's being portrayed as like a black radical. And so he's using the language. They're no longer using a language just exclusively of white supremacists because that can't stick for too long. America is a very immigrant country. Mm-hmm. Very immigrant, obviously. Mm-hmm. We're the immigrant country, right? So it doesn't work, right? Everybody knows it's an industry, right? It's everybody knows it's a financial. They're trying to appeal to a black aspirant who wants to use that type of language. Everybody knows that. I'll say it, but everybody knows it. These leaks is they're using words like patriot, and patriots are black people also, and minorities and people who are economically disadvantaged and immigrants who don't have faith in the government, and they feel the government makes misrepresentations. So they're also using that type of language.
Actually, Trudeau came out today and said he finally came out with now the same kind of language, except for even worse. He just said anybody who doesn't believe the government narrative is a tinfoil hat conspiracist, and that's really funny because that's been things that the citizens have been saying, right? So now he's just parroting that because he still says that we're a racist country, even though we're so multicultural. You know, it's so bizarre because that's like Canada sometimes parrots different things that are happening in the States, you know, like where we don't have the same issues, you know, but he's like, Canada is, you know, has institutionalized racism and this and that. And you're like, what? That's never been an issue, you know, you know, and I know that in the States, it's been an issue, you know, that's been debated for many, many years. Right. But he just brought this up like, oh, we're just going to imitate what they're doing there. So language is powerful, and these guys sure know how to use it.
But can you help me better understand? Because I know we were talking about this earlier today.
Yeah.
Can you help me better understand some of the language and some of the bills and the way they're written? You said has a lot of ambiguity to it, deliberately so that they can write whatever they want into it.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, there's the best that I can interpret it is that you were kind of asking me earlier today, what kind of authority does the federal government have over, the different restrictions that are in place compared to what the provinces have in place, right? And how I look at it is that the language of the Quarantine Act, which is a federal act, is kind of allowing them to get their hands into provincial health matters because of the language, because it says we can define anybody, any public health officer as a peace officer to come in and implement these I guess measures, so it's hard to define, really. I have to look more into the kind of ins and outs, but I know that what seems to be going on is that things are coming from a federal level, but they're getting distributed by the provinces because they're all kind of in lockstep. But the order, I think, is coming from above.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Southern Grace 1, thank you so much for joining us. And I can't tell where you are, but it looks like a happy place, right? There's a lot of green and flowers. That looks like Canada. It looks like Canada, except you don't see the tyrants in the back, right? It looks like Canada. So Southern Grace, Southern Grace. I'm 40 and remember the exact place I was in when that video played, the video that I played of Iraq. The entire bar erupted in USA. And I knew it was a lie when I heard them say that there was a secret meeting in Prague between Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein's agents, right? And Nancy and I think had just come back from Prague also, so it was kind of funny. And I'll tell you something interesting. So they used that, and they said, look, they used that literally as a big piece of evidence that there was a secret meeting between Osama bin Laden's agent and Saddam Hussein's agent, this collusion type of meeting that occurred. And then if you recall, during Russiagate, right?
Yeah.
They said that Manafort had a secret meeting in Prague. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Can't you
Prague is the place.
Can't you write a new script? I'm like, all they did was like they took the old playbook and they took out, I forget the name of the guy. If somebody can look up the name of the guy who was allegedly the spy in Prague, who went to Prague, look it up, because there was like an Iraqi agent or it was an Iraqi agent who apparently they said went to Prague or something. Look it up. It was like 2001.
I will.
And I'm like, well, if somebody on who's watching this now can watch, who can do that, can Google it. And then when Manafort, they were like, Trump's guy, they were like, he secretly went to Prague. And I'm like, seriously? Are you serious? I've been through this before. I'm not an idiot. I'm like, all they did is they took that same script and they like crossed out that Iraqi guy's name and they wrote in Manafort and they were like, let's do it.
I'm sure there's plenty of that going on here. Listen, I have to tell you that my baby-ometer is going off.
You've been awesome. You've been so awesome. I really appreciate it. I'm going to look for a comment to close up on. And because everyone's been so nice that I'm looking, and we didn't have it, and it's my fault, right? We didn't, and Peebo721 says
Saddam fed the lie too.
Saddam fed the lie too. So I'm going to look for a comment to close up on, because what happens is whatever comment I close up on is going to be the last, because it's the last thing that people see. It's going to be like the thing that gets imprinted. So I'm looking for like the perfect one, and I don't want it to be the dancing nurses, and I don't want it to be this one. I got this one ready too.
You had video come out before we go to break where you wanted to.
That's the one with the giant Q-tip of Cuomo.
No, we have that in one of our videos. That's terrible.
So if somebody can give me like the perfect thing to say goodbye to Kate, that would be awesome. I apologize that I didn't have a chance to preload like your video from your YouTube. So
that's okay. They're all long ones.
Yeah. Could you share that then? Would that be all right?
Yeah, like a video, you mean, or?
Could you share with the address, like on YouTube, how people can find you? Would that be all right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys. So please come and subscribe, because we're also pretty shadow banned, I believe. So we did get censored before. Well, we try not to now. So if you go to YouTube /C/Kate Wand. So you'll find my channel there, and you can come join and see what we're up to. We've got lots of videos up and more to come. So there you have it. That's where we're at.
Yeah, and I'm looking at, so yeah, it's youtube.com and then it's Kate Wand. So it's so easy to find you.
Yeah.
And we had, how long do you think this has been? How long do you think we've been on air for?
I see a timer.
Okay, forget, that's cheating. You think, no, I mean, your child is like another day old. That's how long we've been on this.
He is, exactly. So
maybe we'll close with this. What do you think about that? What do you think about
Canada
that?
Canada is a liberal technocrat's dream. That's why lockdowns have worked. Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Canada is run by experts, so-called experts, right? And science with a capital S. And it's completely authoritarian now. Everything is dictated, up until who you can see outside of your household. Next, I'm sure they'll be in our households. Actually, they were, because our public health officer, Theresa Tam, was suggesting that when you were engaging in bedroom activities that you should be wearing a mask. So there you have it.
Nancy and I have always worn a mask. We've always taken precautions. Always taken precautions.
Yeah, it's to each their own. To each their own. So but yes, it is.
So we're going to close up in just 1 second, and we have run 2 hours and 35 minutes. So Peebo 721, thank you so much for joining us. And I want to and Bawash, who's been awesome, and I'm sure Kate, you've seen their comments also, so they've been very helpful.
Very good.
And I want to thank everybody so much for allowing Kate and I to be the guest on your Twitter feed today. And hopefully we got to a lot of your questions, and there was a lot of really interesting ones, and hopefully everyone's had a really good time.
Yeah.
And Kate, you had a good time, right? You had a good time.
I had a great time. Thank you so much. This has been very nice, Adam. I appreciate the invitation and hope to be back in the future.
Yeah, of course. So what I'm going to do, you're going to be back in the future after you get out of jail, because you're going to jail.
That's what I think. That's what I think.
After you get out, you can tell us all about it.
Can you bail me out? Will you bail me?
No, I won't.
Send someone. Send a good lawyer my way, at least.
Oh, that I'll do.
I would appreciate it.
Yeah, or maybe while you're in re-education camp, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lawyers there with you, so maybe they can do something with you.
But literally it's funny, but that does scare me. And it scares me because I have a baby. Otherwise, I would be like, okay, you know what? But the fact that we're joking about it, but that there's some truth in that is terrifying. Yeah.
It is. So I'm going to press the button. And when I press that button, have you watched a lot of these? You've watched a lot of these. Do you know what I do when these are over? Do you know what I do?
You pray?
No, I always pray. But I eat M&Ms.
Oh.
So I've got them right over there. Nancy's already got them for me.
Very
I might even
nice.
go downstairs and get a pizza. So I want to thank everybody so much. There was a lot of people here, and we all had a lot of fun. And Kate, you are awesome. And you're so Canadian. You're so calm. And I'm like so hyper. You're the best. You're awesome.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate being here. I'm
going to press the button. And when I press the button, everyone's going to go away. But you're going to stay. You're going to stay for a second, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to press the button. Everyone's going to go away. So thank you all so much here. Maybe I'll even put on some music as we go away. But everyone's going to go away except for you. Okay, so just stay with me. And yeah, everybody had such a nice time. So thank you again. And I'm going to press the button now.